The jealousy paradox. Jealousy is an emotion that often masks itself in anger, frustration, and bitterness, but at its core, it quietly whispers a secret. Jealousy is rarely about hatred, and even more rarely about superiority. It is paradoxically a mirror revealing deep admiration for another's qualities, possessions, or successes. What we feel jealous of points not to what we despise, but to what we desire, admire, or even secretly wish we could embody ourselves. When we experience jealousy, we rarely stop to examine the source beneath the surface-level irritation. Instead, we let it fester, convincing ourselves that the person we envy must somehow be undeserving, lucky, or fraudulent. We look for flaws, for reasons to tear them down, because acknowledging the true root of jealousy feels vulnerable. It feels like admitting that we see something in them that we wish we could find in ourselves. This strange and ironic emotional twist is what creates the jealousy paradox. At the very moment when jealousy grips our hearts with negativity, it is simultaneously offering us a roadmap to our deepest aspirations. It is not a punishment, but an illumination. It shows us what we value, what we admire, and what we, deep down, would love to move toward. In this way, jealousy can be seen not as a flaw of character, but as a misunderstood form of guidance. Imagine someone feeling jealous of a friend who has just achieved remarkable success in a career path they both once dreamed about. On the surface, there might be tension, coldness, or passive-aggressive behavior. But under it all, the jealousy isn't rooted in a belief that the friend is unworthy. Rather, it reveals a painful, unspoken admiration. The jealous person sees in their friend something they admire deeply: ambition, courage, or the ability to persevere. The tragedy of unchecked jealousy is that it often leads to distancing from those we could otherwise learn from. Instead of drawing closer to the very people who embody the traits we respect, we push them away. We isolate ourselves. And in doing so, we deprive ourselves of growth, mentorship, and insight. The jealousy paradox thus operates like a test. Will we recognize the admiration hiding within our envy, or will we reject the gift out of pride and self-defense? Throughout history, jealousy has been painted as one of the deadly sins. It has been linked to betrayal, to the destruction of relationships, to war, and even to the downfall of empires. Yet rarely do we view it with enough nuance to see its dual nature. Jealousy is destructive when it is repressed or projected outward, but when it is examined with honesty and self-awareness, it becomes constructive, a map toward our own potential. If you look closely, moments of jealousy are almost never random. They tend to arise in specific situations, toward specific kinds of people, displaying specific kinds of traits or successes. We don't feel jealous of everything we encounter. We feel jealous when something touches a nerve, awakening an old dream, a hidden ambition, or a part of ourselves we have neglected. The heart knows when it sees something it yearns for. Take, for example, the jealousy one might feel toward an artist. Perhaps you see someone create effortlessly, their paintings admired and celebrated, a feeling of jealousy wells up. But if you strip away the defensiveness and judgment, you might realize you have long harbored a desire to express yourself creatively. You might realize that admiration, not contempt, is the real emotion hiding beneath the surface. The challenge is that jealousy feels so uncomfortable and shameful that we often cover it with layers of disdain, sarcasm, or dismissal. We protect our ego by convincing ourselves that the person we envy is arrogant, lucky, or undeserving. But this self-protection only deepens the wound. It leads to a hardening of the heart, making it even more difficult to recognize what the jealousy is trying to tell us. If you could learn to sit quietly with your jealousy, not react to it, not project it outward, but simply observe it with curiosity, you would uncover treasures hidden in the pain. You would discover the dreams you gave up on. You would find the talents you suppressed out of fear of failure. You would reconnect with the parts of yourself that still long to be realized. It is important to understand that jealousy does not mean you wish harm upon the person you envy. It simply means you have recognized something beautiful in them that you have not yet fully embraced within yourself. Their existence becomes a painful reminder of a potential still dormant in your own life. And so the paradox tightens. Jealousy is a form of unspoken admiration, a bittersweet tribute to another's light. If we reframe jealousy as admiration interrupted by insecurity, we begin to heal. We can begin to see those who trigger our jealousy not as rivals or threats, but as inspirations. We can move from bitterness to gratitude, recognizing that they are living examples of what is possible. Their achievements are not accusations against us. They are invitations to pursue what we truly love. Often, what holds us back from embracing this truth is the deeply human fear of inadequacy. When we see someone thriving in an area where we have struggled or given up, it stirs a deep wound. We ask ourselves, why not me? But instead of staying with that question in a spirit of growth, we turn it into resentment. We deflect the pain outward rather than using it as fuel to reignite our passions. The jealousy paradox asks us to do something courageous, to transform envy into aspiration, to see every pang of jealousy not as a condemnation of ourselves, but as a signal pointing toward what matters most to us. It invites us to be humble enough to learn from those we envy, to ask questions, to be curious about their journeys, and to be willing to grow. There is a deep irony at play here. Often, those we are most jealous of are not even aware of the admiration we secretly feel. In fact, many of them would likely be honored, humbled, or surprised to know they have sparked such strong emotions in others. Our jealousy feels so isolating, but it is really a bridge, connecting us to others through the shared human experience of yearning. Understanding jealousy in this way also softens our relationships. Instead of competing or comparing ourselves endlessly, we can begin to appreciate the beauty in others without fear. We can celebrate their successes while nurturing our own paths. We can allow admiration to flow freely, unchained by shame or insecurity. There is a profound freedom that comes from owning your jealousy, from saying, yes, I admire what they have done, I admire who they are becoming, and I can learn from it. In doing so, you transform jealousy from a chain that binds you into a key that unlocks your potential. You no longer see yourself as less than, but as someone capable of similar greatness. Jealousy is not a curse, but a call to remember your dreams, a call to reconnect with your passions, a call to become more fully yourself. When you answer this call with openness instead of resentment, you step into a life fueled not by bitterness, but by inspiration. You awaken the sleeping parts of your soul and allow admiration to become a catalyst for transformation. The jealousy paradox reminds us that emotions are rarely what they seem on the surface. They are layered, complex, and often rich with hidden meaning. By peeling back the layers of jealousy, we uncover not only admiration, but the seeds of our own growth. We realize that the people who trigger jealousy in us are not barriers to our happiness, but signposts pointing the way. It takes humility to learn from those we envy. It takes courage to admit that our jealousy reveals our own desires and dreams. But in doing so, we reclaim our power. We shift from feeling like victims of circumstance to becoming authors of our own stories. We move from resentment to reverence. And in doing so, we honor not only those we admire, but also the parts of ourselves that are ready to rise. The next time jealousy visits your heart, pause, sit with it, look beneath its prickly surface. Ask yourself, what is it trying to show me? What dream have I neglected? What part of myself is yearning to awaken? And then, instead of closing your heart in defense, open it in gratitude. Thank the feeling for revealing what you cherish, thank the person who inspired it, and then take a step, however small, toward becoming the person you are meant to be. Jealousy is not your enemy. It is your hidden admiration speaking through the language of longing. It is the voice of your deeper self, calling you to grow, to strive, and to honor your highest possibilities. When you embrace the jealousy paradox, you transform a painful emotion into a powerful ally on your journey toward becoming all you are capable of being. In this light, you begin to see that jealousy is not a sign of weakness, but of possibility. It is evidence that there is more within you, waiting to be expressed. It is a mirror reflecting your untapped potential. And when you stop fighting it, stop running from it, and instead lean into it with curiosity and compassion, you find that what once felt like a burden becomes a blessing. The jealousy paradox is a reminder that emotions are teachers, even the ones we wish we didn't feel, especially the ones that sting the most. If you listen carefully, jealousy will not lead you astray. It will lead you home, to your dreams, your ambitions, your truest self, waiting patiently for you to remember. The paradox of hedonism. The pursuit of happiness is often seen as the ultimate goal of life. We chase pleasure, joy, and contentment with the hope that attaining them will complete us. We set out to collect experiences, accomplishments, and possessions, believing they will secure a permanent state of happiness. Yet, the more directly we pursue happiness for its own sake, the more it seems to slip through our fingers. This strange contradiction is known as the paradox of hedonism. At first glance, it seems logical that if you want to be happy, you should do whatever makes you feel good, seek pleasure, avoid pain, and maximize enjoyment at every turn. But reality paints a different picture. When happiness becomes the end goal itself, we often find ourselves feeling hollow, disappointed, and restless. The act of constantly measuring whether we are happy enough can ironically lead to chronic dissatisfaction. The paradox of hedonism suggests that happiness cannot be caught by chasing it directly. Like a butterfly, happiness flutters away the more aggressively you try to catch it. It is often a byproduct of engaging fully with life, rather than a prize to be won through sheer effort or strategy. The happiest moments frequently arrive when we are not thinking about happiness at all, but rather when we are absorbed in meaningful activities, relationships, or challenges. This idea runs counter to much of modern culture, where pleasure-seeking is heavily marketed and encouraged. Advertisements promise happiness through products, vacations, and lifestyles. Social media highlights curated moments of joy, convincing us that everyone else has figured out the secret. We are conditioned to believe that happiness is an achievable, purchasable, and measurable state. Yet, the more we try to engineer our happiness through external means, the more we find ourselves trapped in cycles of yearning and discontent. When you chase happiness directly, every moment becomes an evaluation. Am I happy right now? Was this worth it? Why am I not feeling as good as I thought I would? This constant self-monitoring fractures the experience itself. Instead of simply living, we stand outside of our lives, judging them in real time. The very act of monitoring our happiness undermines our ability to experience it fully. True happiness, paradoxically, tends to arise when we lose ourselves in something larger than ourselves. When we immerse in creative work, meaningful conversations, acts of kindness, or moments of awe, we forget to ask whether we are happy. We are simply alive, present, and connected. In those moments, happiness sneaks in through the back door, unbidden and effortless. The philosopher John Stuart Mill articulated this paradox clearly. He wrote, "Ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so." Mill, who spent much of his life pondering the nature of happiness, came to realize that it cannot be pursued as an end in itself. Instead, happiness emerges indirectly when we pursue other values: truth, beauty, justice, love. It is a consequence, not a goal. Understanding the paradox of hedonism invites us to rethink our approach to life. Rather than asking, "How can I be happy?" a more fruitful question might be, "What can I give myself to wholeheartedly?" In giving ourselves fully to something meaningful, we create the conditions where happiness can grow organically, like a plant nourished by sunlight and rain, rather than force-fed with artificial fertilizer. This paradox also explains why so many people who seem to have it all still feel empty. Fame, wealth, and pleasure can provide momentary highs, but if they are pursued solely for the feeling they are supposed to generate, they often lead to a deeper hunger. Pleasure without purpose quickly becomes a trap, leaving us constantly needing more stimulation, more excitement, more validation, but never feeling truly fulfilled. By contrast, those who find deep joy often describe it not as a constant high, but as a quiet contentment that runs beneath the surface. It comes from living in alignment with one's values, cultivating relationships, contributing to something larger than oneself. It is not about maximizing pleasure or minimizing discomfort, but about engaging deeply with life in all its complexity. The paradox of hedonism also sheds light on why happiness often feels so fragile when it becomes our obsession. Life is unpredictable. Pain, loss, and disappointment are inevitable. If our happiness depends on the constant avoidance of suffering and the constant presence of pleasure, it will be perpetually under threat. But if happiness is rooted in resilience, purpose, and connection, it can endure even through hard times. One way to escape the trap of the paradox is to shift focus from happiness to meaning. Meaning is sturdier than pleasure. Meaning can survive even when circumstances are painful. When we find meaning in our struggles, in our sacrifices, in our efforts, happiness often follows in unexpected ways. It is not the giddy, fleeting happiness of a good meal or a new gadget, but the deeper, richer happiness of knowing our lives matter. Psychological research supports this insight. Studies consistently show that people who prioritize meaningful goals, such as developing skills, helping others, or building strong relationships, tend to report higher levels of life satisfaction over time than those who prioritize pleasure. Pleasure fades quickly, while meaning builds and deepens. The paradox of hedonism teaches us patience. Happiness is not something you can demand or schedule. It grows slowly, like a tree, rooted in daily choices, small acts of love, and moments of authentic connection. It cannot be hacked, rushed, or tricked into existence. It must be allowed to arise in its own time, in its own way. This perspective is both humbling and liberating. It releases us from the exhausting task of constantly trying to be happy. It invites us instead to live fully, to engage deeply, to care passionately about things beyond ourselves. It invites us to find joy in the journey, rather than waiting for a destination. Paradoxically, when we stop obsessing over our happiness and start immersing ourselves in the richness of life, we become happier. When we stop measuring every experience by how much pleasure it delivers, we open ourselves to deeper, subtler forms of joy. When we stop fearing pain and start embracing growth, we find a happiness that is less fragile and more enduring. The pursuit of happiness for its own sake often leads to anxiety, comparison, and dissatisfaction. We become trapped in a mindset of never enough. No matter how good a moment is, we fear it could be better. No matter how much we have, we fear it could slip away. The paradox tightens its grip. But when we pursue excellence, love, learning, service, creativity, things that matter for their own sake, we free ourselves. We stop trying to control happiness, and instead, we cultivate the conditions in which happiness can flourish naturally. We turn our attention outward, to the world, to others, to the work and wonder around us. In this way, the paradox of hedonism offers profound wisdom for how to live. It suggests that the richest life is not the one most stuffed with pleasures, but the one most filled with purpose. It reminds us that happiness is a side effect, not a trophy. It shows us that by letting go of the frantic pursuit of feeling good, we open ourselves to the deeper satisfaction of doing good, loving well, and being fully alive. There is also a kind of mercy hidden within this paradox. It means we don't have to be constantly happy to have a good life. It means that moments of struggle, boredom, or sadness are not failures. They are part of the fabric of a meaningful life. they can coexist with and even enhance our overall sense of fulfillment. The paradox of hedonism also helps us to be gentler with ourselves and others. We recognize that happiness is not a constant state, but a fleeting visitor. We stop blaming ourselves when it leaves. We stop expecting life to be a non-stop celebration. Instead, we learn to savor the moments of joy when they come and to move through the moments of pain with grace and patience. The paradox teaches us that happiness is not a possession but a process. It is not a destination but a way of traveling. It is not something we can command, but something we can invite by living with openness, courage, and love. When we give up the desperate chase for happiness, we find that life itself becomes more vivid, more real, and more precious. We stop rushing past our days in search of some future bliss, and we start inhabiting them fully. We stop demanding that every moment be pleasurable, and we start discovering the beauty in small things, the warmth of the sun, the sound of laughter, the satisfaction of a job well done. Thus, the paradox of hedonism is not a curse, but a blessing in disguise. It points us away from shallow pleasures and toward deeper sources of joy. It calls us to live not for happiness, but for wholeness. And in doing so, it opens the door to the kind of happiness that no pleasure alone can ever provide, the happiness of a life well lived. Happiness, in its truest form, is a quiet companion to a meaningful life, not a glittering prize to be seized. It is the music that arises when we dance for the love of dancing, not for the applause. It is the peace that comes when we stop asking if we are happy and start asking how we can love, serve, create, and grow. In the final analysis, the paradox of hedonism teaches us this simple but profound truth. To find happiness, stop looking for it. Look for meaning instead. Look for love. Look for purpose. And happiness, like a shy and gentle friend, will find you when you least expect it. The forgetting paradox. Forgetting is one of the strangest and most elusive aspects of the human mind. It happens without warning, without permission, and often without even awareness. You might forget a conversation, a promise, or a dream, but when you forget you forgot, something even more mysterious occurs. In that moment, the very existence of forgetting dissolves. This is the heart of the forgetting paradox. If you forget that you forgot, does forgetting even exist? At first glance, the question seems playful, almost trivial, but like many paradoxes, it opens a doorway into deep philosophical and psychological territory. Memory is often thought of as the bedrock of personal identity, the thread that ties our past to our present. Forgetting, then, seems like a hole in that fabric. Yet, if we are unaware of what we have forgotten, it leaves no trace, no mark, no wound. It is as if it never existed at all. The forgetting paradox challenges the very nature of how we understand memory and loss. We typically think of forgetting as a negative event, the erasure of something once known. But if a memory disappears so completely that even its absence is forgotten, it raises a strange question. Is there any meaningful difference between that memory never having existed in the first place and its total erasure from consciousness? Imagine an old friend you once knew well. Over time, the details of your connection fade, the sound of their voice, the specific adventures you shared, the in-jokes that once seemed immortal. Eventually, you no longer even remember that there was something to remember. The forgetting becomes so complete that it loops around into non-existence. The friendship, once vibrant, now occupies no space in your mind. Is it truly forgotten, or has it been annihilated beyond forgetting? This leads to an even stranger thought. Perhaps forgetting is only real to the extent that we remember that we have forgotten. If you feel the ache of something missing, if you sense the outline of an absence, then forgetting has a presence. It has emotional weight, a kind of negative space. But if even that outline is gone, if there is no longing, no awareness, no trace, then forgetting loses its substance. It becomes an event without an observer, a ghost without a witness. The human mind is wired to focus on what is present, what is accessible. Memory retrieval depends on cues, triggers, associations. Without them, a memory can fade so deeply into the unconscious that it is functionally gone. But does the memory truly vanish, or does it merely slip behind a curtain we can no longer lift? Science suggests that forgotten memories often still exist somewhere in the brain, dormant but not destroyed. Yet from the standpoint of conscious experience, they are as good as erased. The forgetting paradox also touches the nature of knowledge and reality itself. If something once known can vanish so completely from awareness that its loss is undetectable, it blurs the line between existence and non-existence. What is the difference between a memory that never formed and a memory that has been utterly forgotten? What is the difference between a truth we never knew and a truth we once knew but have now lost beyond recognition? There is a peculiar kind of mercy in forgetting. Painful memories, regrets, and sorrows sometimes fade with time. When they disappear so fully that we no longer even recall having suffered, it grants a strange kind of healing. But the cost is invisibility. We cannot cherish what we do not remember. We cannot grieve what we have completely forgotten. In this way, forgetting robs both joy and sorrow of their final echoes. In relationships, the forgetting paradox plays out in tender and sometimes tragic ways. Lovers who part ways often promise to remember each other, to hold their connection sacred even across time and distance. But life moves forward, memories erode, and eventually not only the shared moments but the very significance of those moments may vanish. When neither remembers the love that once burned brightly, has it truly died, or has it merely been forgotten out of existence? The paradox also hints at the nature of history, both personal and collective. Entire cultures forget parts of their histories. Events once earth-shattering fade into obscurity, and over generations the collective memory thins. At some point, forgotten atrocities, achievements, or lessons cease to exist in the minds of the living. They have not merely been misplaced, they have been dissolved. In forgetting that we forgot, history itself shifts, softens, and sometimes disappears. Forgetting can be intentional or accidental. We try to forget trauma, heartbreak, embarrassment, yet trying to forget often backfires, reinforcing the memory instead. True forgetting, the kind that leads to the forgetting paradox, is almost never deliberate. It sneaks up on us, it slips past conscious will, and erases quietly, almost kindly, without warning. But if forgetting erases itself from our awareness, it creates a strange silence in the record of our lives. It is as if pages have been torn out of a diary, not leaving jagged edges, but smoothing over so seamlessly that we don't even realize something is missing. Our sense of continuity, our identity, remains intact, unaware of the absences shaping it. Some philosophers suggest that memory is not a static recording but a constant act of reconstruction. Each time we remember something, we are rebuilding it, reshaping it slightly. Memories are not photographs, they are stories we retell ourselves. If that is true, then forgetting is not merely loss, but a form of narrative collapse. When we forget, we forgot. A whole potential story vanishes, leaving no trail, no remnant. The forgetting paradox also raises unsettling possibilities about knowledge itself. If we can so easily lose not only information but the awareness of its loss, how reliable is any knowledge we hold? How much of what we believe to be a complete understanding of the world is riddled with invisible gaps, holes where once there were memories, facts, or insights, now completely erased? In a more metaphysical sense, the forgetting paradox challenges the notion of permanence. Nothing we know, nothing we feel is guaranteed to endure in our conscious mind. Over time, the accumulation of forgotten memories could reshape who we are, not through deliberate choice, but through the silent erosion of what once mattered. Identity itself becomes fluid, mutable, shaped as much by what we forget as by what we remember. There is also an existential comfort in the forgetting paradox. Our mistakes, our shame, our failures, over time, they too can vanish so completely that even the memory of regret disappears. Life grants second chances not only by moving forward, but by allowing us to forget backward, to shed burdens we no longer remember carrying. Yet this comfort is bittersweet. Forgetting can mean the loss of wisdom. Hard-earned lessons can fade if their original pain is forgotten. Insights gained through suffering can dissolve if the memory of that suffering vanishes. Without remembering our scars, we risk repeating the same wounds. Forgetting, when complete, is both liberation and vulnerability. Art, literature, and culture often serve as repositories against forgetting. We write books, paint murals, compose songs to preserve what memory alone cannot guarantee. We externalize our memories into objects, traditions, rituals, hoping to guard against the forgetting paradox by creating external anchors. Yet even these anchors are fragile. They too can be lost, misinterpreted, or abandoned. On a personal level, the forgetting paradox can be a call to mindfulness, to cherish the fleeting present, to savor experiences while they are vivid. Because no matter how significant something feels today, it is never immune from the slow drift of forgetting. Memory is precious precisely because it is fragile. Even within our living memory, the contours of our past are constantly shifting. Stories we once told ourselves with confidence can blur, rearrange, or disappear. Friends fade into acquaintances. Dreams fade into puzzles we can no longer solve. The forgetting paradox is not a rare event, it is a daily reality woven into the fabric of being. And yet, forgetting also makes space for newness. If we remembered everything perfectly, life would be suffocating under the weight of infinite detail. Forgetting prunes the tree of experience, allowing growth, change, and renewal. It is not merely a loss but a necessary adaptation, a quiet partner to memory's brilliance. Ultimately, the forgetting paradox invites a profound humility. We do not control our minds as fully as we like to believe. Our memories, our knowledge, our very sense of self are subject to forces beyond conscious command. We live not with perfect records, but with living, breathing tapestries, full of holes and stitching. If forgetting is so complete that it erases even the awareness of its own happening, then, in a sense, it becomes invisible. It is neither an event to mourn nor an act to celebrate, it simply is, or rather, it simply isn't. It is absence made perfect. And so, the forgetting paradox leaves us with a haunting, beautiful thought. Much of who we are, much of what has shaped us, lies in the invisible space between memory and oblivion. Our lives are shaped not only by what we remember, but by what we have forgotten, and forgotten we forgot. In this delicate dance between remembering and forgetting, we live, love, learn, and eventually fade. Perhaps forgetting is not a failure, but a feature of being human. Perhaps it is a gift, sparing us the burden of carrying every moment forever. Perhaps the fact that we can forget, and forget we forgot, is not a flaw to be corrected, but a secret grace, a quiet mercy that allows us to keep moving forward, even when the past becomes weightless mist. The forgetting paradox reminds us that absence is as real as presence, that loss shapes us as surely as gain, and that sometimes the most powerful forces in our lives are the ones we can no longer even name. The fear of death paradox. Death is often portrayed as the ultimate fear, the final enemy that stands against life itself. For centuries, philosophers, poets, and ordinary people alike have wrestled with the terror of non-existence. We imagine death as an abyss, a darkness that swallows everything we are, everything we know. We dread the idea of our consciousness ending, of our thoughts, memories, and experiences dissolving into nothingness. Yet at the heart of this fear lies a strange and unsettling paradox. We fear non-existence, though we will never experience it. To experience something requires awareness. We know pain because we feel it. We know joy because we sense it. But death, true death, the complete cessation of consciousness, is not something we can ever feel. It is not a state of suffering or sadness. It is not a state at all. It is the absence of states, the absence of awareness. And because of that, it is something we can never truly experience. In this way, the fear of death becomes an exercise in fearing something that, by its very nature, we can never encounter directly. When you sleep deeply without dreams, you do not fear that temporary lapse of consciousness. You awaken surprised that hours have passed without your awareness. In deep sleep, there is no suffering, no terror, no sensation of absence. Death, from one perspective, might be something similar, an endless, dreamless sleep from which there is no waking. Yet, unlike sleep, death has no end, no future moment of return to consciousness, and because of this our minds rebel. We cannot imagine not imagining. The fear of death paradox strikes at the limitations of human thought. We are wired to imagine experiences. We project ourselves into the future, envisioning pain, joy, love, or loss. But we cannot imagine true nothingness, because imagining requires a subject, an I doing the imagining. In trying to picture our own non-existence, we are caught in a loop. We who imagine cannot imagine ourselves not exist. This paradox reveals why the fear of death can be so potent and so irrational at the same time. We are afraid of something we can describe with words but cannot grasp with our senses or our minds. We fear annihilation, but annihilation is not something that will be felt. It is not pain, it is not loneliness, it is not anything. It is the absence of all feeling, of all loneliness, of all suffering, and also of all joy. Many philosophers, from Epicurus to modern thinkers, have pointed out that fearing death is akin to fearing a time before we were born. We do not feel anguish over the millions of years that passed before our birth. We do not mourn the lost centuries we never lived. Those absences do not hurt us. They do not even touch us. Death, they argue, should be viewed the same way, as a return to the state of non-existence that we have already experienced before birth. And yet, emotionally, this logic often fails to comfort us. Even if we intellectually understand the paradox, our hearts still tremble. This is because fear is not purely rational. It arises from deeper instincts, instincts wired for survival. Every organism clings to life, fights for breath, recoils from threats. To fear death is to feel the pull of life's deepest programming. Even when we know, rationally, that death is beyond suffering, the body, the heart, the very bones resist the idea of surrender. This resistance to death, this primal fear, has driven some of humanity's greatest achievements. Art, science, religion, and philosophy all emerge, in part, from our refusal to accept impermanence. We build monuments to outlast our fragile bodies. We write books to preserve our voices beyond the grave. We tell stories of afterlives and reincarnation to soothe the terror of finality. In fearing death, we have shaped culture, civilization, and even our understanding of the cosmos. Yet, seen through the lens of the fear of death paradox, all these efforts to escape non-existence become both heroic and poignantly futile. No matter how grand our works, no matter how far our influence reaches, there will come a time, whether tomorrow or in the deep future, when we as individuals will cease to be conscious. We will not mourn ourselves. We will not regret. We will not even know that we are gone. There is, then, a kind of freedom hidden within the paradox. If we can embrace the fact that death is not an experience waiting for us, but simply the end of experiencing, we can be liberated from certain kinds of fear. We can stop wasting life worrying about a sensation that will never come. We can live more fully, more bravely, knowing that death is not a looming horror, but a peaceful silence we will never have to endure. Still, the fear of death paradox lingers because it taps into a deeper fear, not of pain, but of losing what we love. We are afraid not just of non-existence, but of leaving life unfinished, of losing connection to those we cherish, of missing the unfolding stories of the world, of being forgotten. Death represents not only the end of me, but the end of participating in everything beautiful, meaningful, and mysterious about existence. This layer of the paradox reveals that the fear of death is not purely self-centered. It is also relational. It is about love, attachment, and meaning. We do not want to miss the laughter of our children, the beauty of a sunset, the thrill of discovery, the comfort of a familiar voice. Death severs those threads, and even though we will not suffer the loss once we are gone, contemplating that severance fills us with dread while we live. Yet even here, the paradox offers a strange comfort. If death is the end of experience, then the experience of loss will belong only to the living, not to the dead. Those who remain will grieve, will remember, will carry the echoes of our existence forward. We who have passed will not feel regret. We will not feel anything. In this way, death harms no one directly. It leaves sorrow behind for others, but it does not inflict sorrow upon the one who dies. Understanding the fear of death paradox invites us to live differently. It calls us to prioritize presence over worry, love over fear, action over paralysis. Knowing that death is not something to be endured, but something to be transcended through living gives each moment more urgency and more sweetness. It shifts our focus from what we will lose someday to what we can savor today. We are the only creatures, as far as we know, who can contemplate our mortality so deeply. This awareness is both a gift and a burden. It sharpens our joys and deepens our griefs. It makes us dream of immortality while reminding us that time is precious. The fear of death paradox reflects this tension perfectly. We fear something we will never feel, yet that fear shapes how we feel about everything else. There is a gentle irony in this. We spend years, even decades, worrying about a moment that we will never witness. We tie ourselves in knots trying to prepare for something that, when it arrives, will erase all preparation. In doing so, we sometimes miss the beauty of being alive. We let the fear of an unexperienced non-existence overshadow the vibrancy of existence itself. And so, the fear of death paradox whispers a quiet wisdom. Do not waste life fearing the end of life. Do not let the unknowable nature of death rob you of the knowable pleasures of living. Do not mistake the absence of future experience for a present threat. Non-existence is not a punishment. It is simply the absence of awareness, just as a candle snuffed out does not suffer its own darkness. In many spiritual traditions, embracing death is seen not as a surrender to despair, but as a path to enlightenment. To accept death is to accept the impermanence of all things. It is to let go of the illusion of control, the illusion of permanence. It is to live more humbly, more gratefully, more courageously. The fear of death paradox reminds us that death is not the enemy of life. It is part of life's very nature. We often imagine death as a boundary, a wall we will slam into. But in truth, it is more like the fading of a song, a beautiful melody that eventually falls silent, not with violence, but with inevitability. And we, who heard the music, are richer for having lived during its playing, even if we cannot carry the notes beyond our final breath. Thus, the paradox teaches us that fearing non-existence is a misdirection of our energy. Our task is not to conquer death, but to cherish life. Not to obsess over the loss to come, but to honor the time we are given. Not to mourn the silence before it falls, but to dance joyfully while the music plays. The fear of death paradox reveals something profound about our nature. We are creatures of longing, creatures of wonder, creatures who gaze into the abyss and create meaning where none is guaranteed. We fear the void, yet in that fear, we affirm the value of being. We tremble before non-existence, and in doing so, we declare that existence matters. Perhaps that is the final lesson of the paradox. To fear death is to love life. To dread non-existence is to cherish existence, and though the fear may never fully vanish, understanding its paradoxical nature can soften its grip. It can remind us that the real challenge is not to outwit death, but to outlove it, to live so fully, so vividly, that even the thought of non-existence cannot dim the light of our days. The Success-Repulsion Paradox. Success is often seen as the pinnacle of human aspiration. From an early age, we are taught to dream of it, strive for it, and celebrate it. Success promises rewards, recognition, and a sense of fulfillment. Yet, hidden within the human psyche is a strange and often invisible phenomenon: the fear of success itself. The Success-Repulsion Paradox reveals that fear of success can sabotage achievement just as powerfully, and sometimes even more subtly, than fear of failure. At first glance, the idea seems absurd. Why would anyone fear the very thing they claim to desire? Why would anyone recoil from the rewards they have worked so hard to earn? Yet when examined closely, the fear of success reveals itself as a powerful, complex force. It operates in the shadows of ambition, quietly undermining efforts, clouding decisions, and causing self-sabotage at critical moments. Fear of failure is easy to understand. It is the dread of falling short, of being judged, of losing security or respect. It is visible, tangible, and often openly discussed. But fear of success is more insidious. It is not the fear of falling, it is the fear of rising, and then facing the consequences of standing in the light. Success brings change, exposure, and new expectations. It demands more from us, and that demand can feel overwhelming. When we succeed, we become more visible. We attract attention, scrutiny, and sometimes envy. The comfort of anonymity disappears, expectations rise, standards tighten, responsibilities grow heavier. The fear is not just about achieving a goal, but about what happens next. Will we be able to sustain it? Will we disappoint others? Will we lose parts of ourselves in the process? The Success-Repulsion Paradox suggests that, deep down, many people associate success with loss rather than gain. They fear losing their freedom, their privacy, their authenticity. They fear that success will alienate them from friends and family, or that it will force them into roles they did not choose. In this way, success becomes a double-edged sword, desired on the surface, but dreaded underneath. Self-sabotage is often the manifestation of this hidden fear. It may appear as procrastination, sudden doubts, or mysterious obstacles that seem to arise just when victory is within reach. People who fear success may unconsciously undermine their own efforts, ensuring that they never have to face the perceived dangers that come with achievement. They may lower their standards, walk away from opportunities, or cling to familiar mediocrity rather than risk the unfamiliar terrain of success. The paradox is that the same energy that drives people towards success also drives them to resist it. They work hard, they dream big, they push forward, and then, as the moment of triumph approaches, they falter. It is not that they are incapable of success. It is that some part of them fears what success will demand of them. Psychologists have long observed this phenomenon. It is often rooted in deep-seated beliefs formed early in life. Perhaps someone was taught that successful people are selfish or lonely. Perhaps they internalized the idea that excelling would mean outshining loved ones and causing resentment. Perhaps they believed that they are unworthy of success and that achieving it would only expose their inadequacies. The Success-Repulsion Paradox also reveals how success can threaten identity. Many people build a self-image around struggle, around being the underdog, the outsider, the dreamer. Success challenges that identity. It demands a new story, a new understanding of oneself, and changing that narrative can feel like a kind of death, a loss of the familiar self, even if the familiar self was struggling. Fear of success can also be tied to the fear of impermanence. Success is often seen as fragile, fleeting. Winning the prize is only the beginning. Keeping it, defending it, living up to it, that is the greater challenge. The prospect of losing success once attained can seem even more painful than never having achieved it at all. Better, some part of the mind reasons, to stay safe in obscurity than to risk the heartbreak of falling from a greater height. In this way, the Success-Repulsion Paradox mirrors the very fear it seeks to avoid. In fleeing from the dangers of success, we embrace the stagnation of unfulfilled potential. We trade the risks of achievement for the certainty of mediocrity, and in doing so, we often feel a deeper, more corrosive regret. The regret of never having tried fully, never having dared greatly. Understanding the Success-Repulsion Paradox invites compassion for ourselves and others. It reveals that procrastination, self-doubt, and underachievement are not always signs of laziness or weakness. They can be signs of deeper fears, fears that deserve acknowledgement, not condemnation. By bringing these fears into the light, by naming them, we can begin to loosen their grip. Awareness is the first step in disarming the paradox. When we recognize the fear of success, we can address it directly. We can ask ourselves, what am I afraid will happen if I succeed? What losses do I imagine? What burdens do I foresee? And are those fears grounded in reality, or are they echoes of old beliefs, old wounds? Often, when we examine these fears, we find that they are exaggerated or outdated. Success does bring change, but not all change is loss. Success brings new responsibilities, but also new freedoms, new opportunities for growth and contribution. Success may shift relationships, but it can also deepen them, inspire others, and create new communities of support. Facing the Success-Repulsion Paradox also requires redefining success itself. If success is seen purely as external achievement, money, fame, status, it is easier to fear. But if success is defined as living in alignment with one's values, as growing into one's full potential, as contributing meaningfully to the world, it becomes less threatening. It becomes a natural extension of a life well lived, rather than a precarious pedestal to fall from. Another key to overcoming the paradox is to embrace imperfection. Success does not require perfection. It does not require unbroken winning streaks or flawless performances. It requires resilience, adaptability, and the willingness to keep growing. Failure, setbacks, and mistakes are part of the journey, not evidence of unworthiness. By making peace with impermanence and imperfection, we can approach success with more courage and less fear. The Success-Repulsion Paradox also reminds us to cultivate a supportive inner dialogue. The voice that says, "You don't deserve this," or "You'll lose it all," is not the voice of truth. It is the voice of fear. And fear, while powerful, is not prophecy. It can be acknowledged, listened to, and then gently set aside, making room for a stronger, kinder voice. The voice that says, "You are ready," and "You are capable," and "You can handle what comes." The Success-Repulsion Paradox teaches us that the barriers to our greatest achievements are often not external, but internal. They are not walls others have built to keep us out, but walls we have built within ourselves to keep ourselves safe. To succeed fully, we must not only overcome external challenges, but also the invisible resistance within our own hearts. By understanding and embracing this paradox, we can begin to dismantle those inner barriers. We can allow ourselves to step into the light, to take up space, to accept the responsibilities and rewards that come with fulfilling our potential. We can trade the safety of smallness for the richness of growth. We can risk change, risk visibility, risk the unknown, because the alternative is a smaller, dimmer life than we are meant to live. The Success-Repulsion Paradox ultimately invites us into a deeper trust, not just trust in our abilities, but trust in our resilience, trust in our capacity to adapt, to learn, to thrive. It calls us to believe that we are not only capable of success, but worthy of it, and that success, far from isolating us, can connect us more deeply to our purpose and to others. Thus, the paradox does not tell us to abandon ambition or to fear achievement. It tells us to approach success with open eyes and open hearts. It tells us to prepare not only for the external challenges of success, but also for the internal transformation it demands. It tells us that fear is natural, but it is not a command. It is simply a sign that we are standing on the threshold of growth. When we recognize the success-repulsion paradox at work in our lives, we can choose differently. We can move forward, even with trembling hands. We can succeed not despite our fears, but alongside them. We can embrace the fullness of life, knowing that success, like failure, is just one part of a larger, richer journey of becoming. The paradox dissolves in the act of living. We realize that success is not something to be feared or worshipped, but something to be experienced, learned from, and shared. We realize that the true danger is not in rising and risking change, but in staying small out of fear. And we realize that, paradoxically, by embracing the possibility of success with all its unknowns, we become freer, braver, and more fully alive. The Privacy Paradox. Privacy has long been held as a fundamental human value. We cherish the idea of being able to control who knows what about us, to maintain the dignity of solitude, to shield parts of ourselves from public scrutiny. In the digital age, calls for privacy are louder and more passionate than ever. We demand privacy policies, encrypted communications, and the right to be forgotten. Yet paradoxically, while people clamor for privacy, they also give away their personal data freely, often without a second thought. This is the essence of the privacy paradox. On the surface, the desire for privacy seems self-evident. People do not want their intimate conversations, financial details, health records, or private thoughts exposed to the world. They resist surveillance and bristle at intrusions. Yet at the same time, millions willingly share their locations, preferences, photographs, and personal experiences on social media platforms. They trade personal information for convenience, entertainment, or a sense of connection, often without fully considering the cost. The privacy paradox raises unsettling questions about human nature and modern society. How can we simultaneously value privacy so deeply and yet behave in ways that erode it? Is this simply hypocrisy, or does it reveal deeper, more complex motivations and misunderstandings? To answer these questions, we must look beneath the surface of behavior to the psychological, social, and technological forces at play. One factor is the allure of immediate gratification. When presented with a shiny new app, a funny quiz, or a personalized shopping experience, the benefits are immediate and tangible. The risks to privacy, by contrast, are abstract and distant. Few people think through the long-term consequences of sharing their data when the immediate reward is so tempting. This cognitive bias toward present rewards over future risks drives much of the behavior that fuels the privacy paradox. Another force at work is the illusion of control. Many digital platforms offer users a sense of agency through privacy settings, consent forms, and terms of service agreements. Yet these measures are often dense, confusing, and skewed in favor of the company. Users may feel they are protecting their privacy by clicking through settings, but in reality they are often agreeing to sweeping data collection practices they barely understand. The illusion of control soothes the conscience, even as it fails to safeguard real privacy. Social pressures also amplify the paradox. In a connected world, participation often requires sharing. To join conversations, build networks, or access services, users must provide information about themselves. Opting out can mean isolation, inconvenience, or invisibility. In this environment, maintaining strict privacy can feel like swimming against the tide, a lonely and exhausting effort that few can sustain for long. Moreover, privacy itself is a shifting concept. Historically, privacy was associated with physical spaces, the home, the private letter, the closed-door meeting. In the digital realm, those boundaries dissolve. Information travels at the speed of light, and digital footprints are nearly impossible to erase. What it means to be private in a networked world is vastly more complicated, and many people have not fully recalibrated their instincts to match this new reality. The privacy paradox is not merely a personal issue, it has vast social implications. When individuals trade their privacy cheaply, they collectively shape a world where surveillance becomes normalized. Companies, governments, and malicious actors build systems designed to harvest, analyze, and exploit personal data at unprecedented scales. The erosion of privacy for the individual contributes to the erosion of freedom, security, and autonomy for society as a whole. Ironically, the fear of missing out, the desire to stay connected, to be seen, to participate, can outweigh the fear of being surveilled. People share more because they want to matter, to belong, to be acknowledged. In a sense, the human need for connection competes directly with the human need for privacy, and often connection wins. There is also a fatalism that feeds the privacy paradox. Many people believe that privacy is already lost, that resistance is futile. They already know everything about me, the thinking goes, so why bother fighting it? This resignation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we accept the loss of privacy as inevitable, the more it becomes so. At a deeper level, the privacy paradox may reflect a tension between two visions of selfhood. One vision sees the self as a private sanctuary, guarded and selective. The other sees the self as a social construct, performed and shared. The internet amplifies the latter vision, encouraging people to curate and broadcast their identities to gain approval, influence, or even survival in a digital economy built on visibility. In this context, privacy can feel not just difficult, but unnatural. To retreat from sharing can feel like a rejection of community, an act of hiding that invites suspicion. Transparency becomes a social virtue, even as it exacts hidden costs. The paradox deepens. To be private is to risk irrelevance. To be public is to risk exploitation. The technology companies that dominate the digital landscape understand this paradox intimately. Their business models depend on it. They design platforms that reward sharing, that make privacy cumbersome, and that obscure the true value of the data being collected. In this way, the privacy paradox is not just a human failing, it is a systemically engineered outcome. Addressing the privacy paradox requires more than personal vigilance. It demands cultural, legal, and technological shifts. It demands systems that respect privacy by default, not just as an optional setting. It demands education that teaches digital literacy, helping people understand the true stakes of their online behavior. It demands collective action to hold powerful institutions accountable for how they gather and use data. On a personal level, overcoming the privacy paradox begins with mindfulness. It begins with pausing before sharing, before clicking, before accepting terms we do not read. It begins with asking simple but powerful questions. Who will see this? Who will benefit from this information? What might I lose by giving it away? It also involves reclaiming the value of solitude, of mystery, of boundaries. In a world that pressures us to expose everything, there is quiet strength in choosing what to withhold. Privacy is not secrecy, it is autonomy. The ability to decide for ourselves what parts of our lives are public and what parts are sacred. The privacy paradox reminds us that convenience is never free. Every trade of information for ease, speed, or entertainment carries hidden costs. Those costs are not paid immediately, but they accrue over time, eroding the fabric of personal freedom until we wake up in a world where privacy is a nostalgic memory. Yet, the situation is not hopeless. Awareness is growing, movements for digital rights, data protection, and ethical technology are gaining ground. Laws like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, signal a shift in how societies value and protect privacy. Technologies like end-to-end encryption and decentralized networks offer new tools for reclaiming control. Still, the greatest challenge remains psychological. It is easier to fear abstract threats than to resist tangible rewards. It is easier to say we value privacy than to live in ways that truly protect it. It is easier to drift with the current of disclosure than to swim against it toward autonomy. The privacy paradox ultimately invites us to re-examine what we mean by freedom. Freedom is not just the ability to speak or act without restraint. It is also the ability to choose when to reveal and when to conceal, when to connect and when to retreat. Without privacy, freedom becomes performative, a show staged for invisible audiences rather than a genuine expression of will. The paradox also reminds us that privacy is relational. It is not merely about hiding, it is about managing the flow of information to maintain trust, intimacy, and dignity. In friendships, in families, in communities, healthy boundaries sustain healthy relationships. The same is true in the broader digital society. Without boundaries, exploitation becomes inevitable. Thus, the privacy paradox is not just a technical or political issue, it is a deeply human one. It touches on how we see ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we balance competing needs for connection and autonomy. It challenges us to live more consciously in a world designed to make unconscious disclosure easy and thoughtless. If we are to resolve the privacy paradox, we must cultivate a culture that honors privacy not as an obstacle to connection, but as a foundation for authentic connection. We must learn to see privacy not as a selfish retreat, but as a necessary condition for freedom, creativity, and integrity. And we must remember that privacy, once lost, is difficult to reclaim. Data does not forget. Networks do not erase easily. Every disclosure leaves traces, building an invisible architecture around our lives. To live wisely in the digital age is to navigate this architecture with care, knowing that every choice shapes not only our own futures, but the future of society itself. The privacy paradox reveals the complexity of being human in a technological world. We are creatures of conflicting desires, longing for safety and connection, craving freedom and recognition, fearing exposure, yet seeking attention. Understanding this complexity is the first step toward living with greater wisdom, greater intentionality, and greater respect for the fragile but essential gift of privacy. The Persuasion Paradox. Persuasion is often seen as a straightforward act. You present compelling evidence, logical arguments, and passionate appeals, and others, seeing the wisdom of your case, change their minds. It seems reasonable, even obvious. Yet human psychology rarely moves in straight lines. The more aggressively we try to persuade someone, the more likely they are to resist. This strange and frustrating phenomenon is known as the Persuasion Paradox. The harder you push, the harder they push back. At first glance, this seems illogical. If you are offering truth, clarity, and reason, why would someone dig in their heels rather than reconsider? But persuasion is not merely a matter of logic. It is a matter of identity, emotion, and autonomy. When people feel their beliefs are under attack, they experience a threat not just to their ideas, but to their sense of self. And when the self feels threatened, it tends to defend itself vigorously, regardless of the evidence. The persuasion paradox is rooted in the psychology of reactance. Reactance is the human tendency to resist being controlled. When people perceive that their freedom to think, feel, or choose is being constrained, they often react by asserting that freedom even more strongly. If you tell someone they must change their mind, they feel their autonomy is under siege, and so they cling even harder to their original belief, sometimes even strengthening it beyond its initial intensity. This is why arguments often become shouting matches rather than conversations. It is why facts, when presented aggressively, often fail to change opinions. It is why the harder you try to convince someone they are wrong, the more entrenched they become. The persuasion paradox shows that persuasion is not primarily about overpowering another person's logic. It is about navigating their sense of autonomy with care and respect. Consider how people react when they feel cornered. When backed into a corner, even a mild person may become fierce. They defend not only the content of their belief, but their right to believe it. Persuasion that feels like pressure triggers this defensive posture, causing people to dig deeper into their existing views, to find justifications they hadn't even thought of before, simply to resist feeling coerced. Thus, successful persuasion often requires paradoxical moves, listening rather than arguing, asking rather than telling, inviting rather than demanding. It requires creating space rather than pressure. It requires allowing people to move toward new ideas at their own pace, in their own way, preserving their sense of dignity and control. The Persuasion Paradox also highlights the role of emotions in belief formation. People often believe what feels true to them, what aligns with their identity, their values, their tribe. Logical arguments can feel cold or alienating if they threaten these emotional attachments. If someone's belief is tied to their sense of belonging or their sense of moral worth, challenging the belief can feel like a personal attack. No wonder they resist. This means that changing minds is rarely about facts alone. It is about empathy. It is about understanding the emotional landscape in which beliefs are rooted. It is about recognizing that people are not blank slates waiting for data. They are complex beings seeking meaning, connection, and coherence in their lives. Any attempt to change their minds must honor that complexity. One powerful illustration of the Persuasion Paradox is found in debates about deeply held beliefs, religion, politics, identity. In these domains, people often double down when confronted with opposing views. Studies have shown that when presented with evidence that contradicts their beliefs, people often experience a backfire effect, where their original beliefs become even stronger. The harder you push, the firmer the walls become. To navigate the Persuasion Paradox effectively, one must shift from confrontation to collaboration. Instead of positioning oneself as an adversary to be defeated, one can become a partner in exploration. Instead of telling someone they are wrong, one can invite them to consider different perspectives. Instead of attacking the belief, one can ask gentle questions that encourage reflection. The spirit of curiosity is a powerful antidote to resistance. When we approach others not with the aim of conquering their minds, but with genuine interest in their views, we create space for growth. People are more willing to reconsider their beliefs when they feel safe, respected, and unthreatened. Curiosity disarms defensiveness and opens doors that force cannot budge. The Persuasion Paradox also teaches us patience. Changing deeply held beliefs is rarely an immediate event. It is a slow process of seeds being planted, questions being pondered, doubts gradually growing. Sometimes a conversation today will bear fruit months or years later, long after the persuader has forgotten the exchange. Pressuring someone for immediate change often sabotages the very openness that time and reflection could nurture. In this way, the paradox challenges the ego of the persuader. It asks us to give up the fantasy of instant victories, to abandon the desire to be proven right on the spot. It asks us to focus less on winning arguments and more on nurturing understanding. It asks us to trust that truth, when offered with kindness and patience, has a power far greater than force. There is also humility in the Persuasion Paradox. It reminds us that we too are susceptible to resistance, that we too resist change when we feel threatened or controlled. Recognizing our own defenses makes us better equipped to understand the defenses of others. It creates compassion, a shared sense of humanity in the often turbulent arena of ideas. Thus, persuasion at its best is not a battle of wills, but a dance of respect. It is not a conquest, but a conversation. It is not about overpowering, but about inviting. It is about offering the gift of perspective without demanding its acceptance. It is about planting seeds without insisting on harvesting the fruit. The Persuasion Paradox also invites us to examine our own motives. Why do we seek to change others' minds? Is it to help them? To serve truth? Or is it to satisfy our own need for validation, for control, for superiority? When our motives are tainted with ego, persuasion becomes pressure, and pressure breeds resistance. But when our motives are rooted in care and humility, persuasion becomes dialogue, and dialogue opens hearts. In a polarized world, understanding the persuasion paradox is more important than ever. As societies fracture along ideological lines, the temptation to shout louder, to push harder, grows. But shouting and pushing only deepen the divides. Healing requires a different approach, an approach grounded in patience, empathy, and respect for human autonomy. It requires the courage to listen deeply, even when we disagree. It requires the grace to ask questions without demanding answers. It requires the wisdom to know that minds and hearts change, not through force, but through invitation, reflection, and time. Ultimately, the Persuasion Paradox teaches a profound truth about human nature. People do not change because they are forced to. They change because they are free to. They change when they feel safe enough to explore, curious enough to question, and respected enough to reconsider. They change when the invitation to grow feels like an opening, not an assault. And so the next time you find yourself trying to persuade, remember the paradox. Step back from pressure, step toward curiosity, trust the process, know that the seeds you plant today may not bloom immediately, but they may still bloom in ways you cannot predict. Honor the autonomy of others, and you honor the deeper truth, that real change, real growth, and real understanding are born not of force, but of freedom. Persuasion is not about overpowering minds, but about opening hearts. It is not about dominating others, but about walking alongside them. It is not about defeating beliefs, but about inviting discovery. When we understand this, we move beyond the futile battles of argument and into the rich, transformative territory of dialogue, compassion, and human connection. The Stress Relief Paradox. Relaxations is often presented as the antidote to modern life. With busy schedules, constant notifications, and endless responsibilities, stress seems inevitable. We are told to seek stress relief through meditation, yoga, deep breathing, and vacations. We are encouraged to make relaxation a goal, a task, a project. Yet the more obsessively we try to relax, the more elusive relaxation becomes. This strange and frustrating reality is known as the stress relief paradox. The harder you try to relax, the more stressed you feel. At first glance, the paradox seems absurd. Relaxation should be simple, a letting go, a natural state. Yet in practice, trying to force relaxation often creates the opposite effect. When relaxation becomes another item on a to-do list, another performance to be perfected, it ceases to be relaxation. It becomes pressure. It becomes one more thing we are anxious about accomplishing. The stress relief paradox is rooted in the nature of effort itself. Relaxation requires a release of effort, a softening of striving. Yet when we approach relaxation with the same mindset we bring to work or achievement, setting goals, measuring progress, judging results, we trap ourselves. We turn relaxation into a performance to be evaluated rather than a state to be experienced. Imagine sitting down to meditate with the thought, I must relax now, I must clear my mind completely, I must feel peaceful immediately. With this mindset, every stray thought, every restless fidget becomes a failure. Instead of softening into the moment, the mind tightens. Instead of relaxing, stress increases. The act of trying too hard undermines the very goal we seek. The stress relief paradox reveals a deeper truth about control. Relaxation, like sleep or creativity, cannot be forced. It must be allowed. It must emerge naturally when conditions are right. The more we grip, the more we chase, the more we demand, the more we push it away. Relaxation is a byproduct of letting go, not an achievement to be seized. This paradox also highlights the role of expectations. When we expect a relaxation technique to deliver immediate, dramatic results, we set ourselves up for disappointment. When the results don't come quickly or fully enough, we feel frustration and self-blame. Why can't I relax? What's wrong with me? These thoughts pile new layers of stress onto the old ones, deepening the cycle. In this way, the very pursuit of stress relief can become a new source of stress. It becomes another arena for self-criticism, perfectionism, and impatience. Instead of providing sanctuary, it becomes a battleground. Instead of offering freedom, it becomes another burden to carry. The stress relief paradox invites us to rethink our approach entirely. It asks us to move away from striving and toward allowing. It asks us to cultivate acceptance rather than achievement. It asks us to stop treating relaxation as a goal to reach and start treating it as a side effect of being present, open, and non-judgmental. True relaxation often comes when we stop trying to manage it. It arises when we become absorbed in something we love, a hobby, a walk, a conversation, a moment of stillness. It arises when we forget to measure our experience, when we simply live it. It is not the result of effort, but of surrender. This does not mean that practices like meditation, deep breathing, or yoga are useless. On the contrary, they are powerful tools. But their power lies not in forcing relaxation, but in creating the conditions where relaxation can happen naturally. They are invitations, not commands. They are opportunities to be, rather than demands to perform. The stress relief paradox also reflects broader cultural patterns. In a society that values productivity, speed, and achievement, even relaxation gets commodified. We are sold apps, gadgets, retreats, and supplements, all promising to optimize our relaxation. But when relaxation becomes another arena of optimization, it loses its essence. It becomes yet another competition, yet another race. To escape the paradox, we must reclaim a different relationship with relaxation. We must see it not as a task, but as a return to a simpler, quieter, more natural state of being. We must trust that relaxation, like a river, will flow when we stop trying to dam or redirect it. One helpful shift is to focus not on relaxing, but on being present. Presence is the soil in which relaxation grows. When we bring our attention fully to the moment, without judgment, without striving, relaxation often arises on its own. It may not be dramatic, it may not be immediate, but it will be real. Another shift is to practice acceptance. Accepting whatever the moment holds, including tension, restlessness, or discomfort, paradoxically creates the spaciousness in which those feelings can soften. Fighting stress often intensifies it. Allowing it creates the possibility of transformation. Patience is also essential. Relaxation deepens over time, like a well filling slowly with rain. It cannot be rushed. It responds not to urgency, but to gentle persistence. When we stop demanding instant results, we open ourselves to deeper, more lasting ease. The stress relief paradox reminds us that relaxation is not an escape from life, but a way of being within life. It is not about shutting out the world, but about opening to it with less resistance. It is about meeting each moment as it is, rather than how we think it should be. This understanding also fosters compassion. Many people blame themselves for their inability to relax. They think they are broken, deficient, or weak. But the paradox shows that the problem is not a personal failure. It is a misunderstanding of the nature of relaxation. Knowing this, we can approach ourselves with more kindness, more gentleness. Stress is not the enemy. It is a signal. It is the body and mind calling for attention, for care, for balance. When we respond to stress not with panic or force, but with curiosity and tenderness, we move toward true healing. We begin to listen, to adjust, to nurture ourselves in ways that foster genuine well-being. Thus, the paradox teaches that relaxation is not something to be captured, but something to be courted. It is not conquered by force, but welcomed by presence. It is not a prize to win, but a companion to befriend. The stress relief paradox invites a deeper wisdom about life itself. Much of what we seek, happiness, love, peace, cannot be forced. They come as gifts when we live with openness, patience, and humility. They come when we stop grasping and start trusting. They come when we honor the rhythms of being rather than the demands of doing. And so, when stress arises, as it inevitably will, perhaps the gentlest, wisest response is not to launch a frantic search for relief, but simply to pause, to breathe, to acknowledge, to make space, to trust that by letting go of the urgent need to relax, we create the very conditions in which relaxation can find us. The stress relief paradox ultimately teaches that the path to peace is not paved with pressure. It is not achieved through effort piled upon effort. It is found in the quiet surrender to what is, in the softening of resistance, in the simple, radical act of being fully present in this moment, exactly as it is. In this way, relaxation ceases to be a goal and becomes a natural expression of living with wisdom and compassion. It becomes not something we chase, but something we embody. It becomes not an achievement, but a homecoming to ourselves, to life, to the vast, open spaces within us where peace has been waiting all along. The self-confidence paradox. Self-confidence is often imagined as an impenetrable armor, a flawless certainty, an unshakable belief in oneself that never wavers. We are taught to admire those who project unbreakable assurance, who move through the world without hesitation or doubt. But the truth of self-confidence is far more nuanced and paradoxical. True confidence does not come from eliminating insecurity, it comes from being comfortable with it. This surprising and profound reality is known as the self-confidence paradox. Real confidence embraces rather than eradicates feelings of vulnerability. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. If confidence means believing in oneself, then wouldn't insecurity be its opposite? Wouldn't doubt, fear, and uncertainty be signs of weakness rather than strength? Yet when we look closely at those who embody genuine confidence, we find not the absence of insecurity, but a different relationship to it. They do not deny their doubts. They coexist with them. They do not wait for fear to disappear before acting. They act alongside it. The self-confidence paradox reveals that insecurity is a natural part of being human. No one is free from it entirely. Life is full of unknowns, challenges, and risks. To expect oneself to feel confident all the time without ever wavering is not only unrealistic, but harmful. It sets up an impossible standard that leads to shame and self-criticism. True confidence accepts that insecurity will arise and does not treat it as evidence of failure. This paradox shifts the focus from eliminating fear to changing our relationship with it. Instead of seeing fear as a stop sign, confident people see it as a natural companion on the road of growth. Instead of being paralyzed by self-doubt, they acknowledge it, make space for it, and move forward anyway. They understand that courage is not the absence of fear. One reason the self-confidence paradox exists is because of the deep human need for authenticity. When we pretend to be perfectly confident, when we mask our insecurities behind bravado or perfectionism, we create a brittle facade. That facade may impress others temporarily, but it disconnects us from our true selves. It creates tension, anxiety, and the constant fear of being found out. Genuine confidence, by contrast, comes from authenticity. It comes from being real about who we are, including our flaws and fears. It comes from accepting our humanity rather than trying to transcend it. When we stop trying to perform confidence and start living authentically, we build a quieter, deeper, and more resilient form of self-trust. This is why some of the most confident people are also some of the most humble. They do not need to boast, dominate, or prove themselves. They are comfortable admitting when they are wrong, asking for help, or saying, "I don't know." Their confidence is not fragile because it is not based on an illusion of invulnerability. It is based on a realistic, compassionate understanding of their own complexity. The self-confidence paradox also teaches that growth and learning are inherently uncomfortable. To stretch beyond our comfort zones, to try new things, to risk failure, these all provoke insecurity. If we demanded perfect confidence before attempting anything new, we would never grow. True confidence is not about feeling ready. It is about trusting that we can handle whatever comes, even if we feel unready. This paradox is especially important in a world obsessed with image. Social media, marketing, and pop culture often present polished, curated versions of life. We see highlight reels, not struggles. We see triumphs, not doubts. This creates the illusion that others are effortlessly confident while we alone struggle with insecurity. Understanding the self-confidence paradox dispels this illusion. It reminds us that everyone wrestles with doubt, and that wrestling is not a flaw, but a feature of the journey. In relationships, the paradox becomes even more visible. The people who are most open, vulnerable, and genuine often create the deepest connections. Those who hide behind masks of perfection often feel isolated, even admired. True confidence allows for vulnerability. It allows for the honesty that says, "I am not perfect, but I am enough." And in that honesty, real intimacy flourishes. The self-confidence paradox also invites a redefinition of strength. Strength is not the absence of fear or weakness. It is the ability to face fear and weakness with compassion and courage. It is the willingness to keep showing up, to keep trying, to keep believing in one's worth even when the road is rough. It is the quiet, steady resilience that grows not by avoiding discomfort, but by embracing it. Self-confidence built on denial, on pretending we have no fears or doubts, is like a house built on sand. It crumbles under pressure. But self-confidence built on acceptance, on the willingness to be present with all parts of ourselves, is like a house built on rock. It stands firm even when the storms come. Practically speaking, embracing the self-confidence paradox means changing how we talk to ourselves. When insecurity arises, instead of berating ourselves, "You shouldn't feel this way," we can offer kindness. "Of course you feel this way. It's okay. You can move forward anyway." This shift from judgment to compassion transforms insecurity from an enemy into a companion. It also means celebrating effort over outcome. If we only feel confident when we succeed, our confidence will always be fragile, dependent on circumstances beyond our control. But if we feel confident because we dared to try, because we honored our values, because we acted with courage, then our confidence is under our control. It becomes a renewable resource. The self-confidence paradox reminds us that perfection is not the goal. Presence is, authenticity is, growth is, and these all involve moments of insecurity, confusion, and vulnerability. They involve feeling lost, uncertain, and afraid, and choosing to keep going anyway. It also teaches that comparison is a thief of true confidence. When we compare our messy insides to others' polished outsides, we create a false narrative of deficiency. True confidence comes from turning inward, from measuring ourselves not against others, but against our own values, intentions, and growth. In leadership, the paradox is equally profound. The best leaders are not those who project invincibility. They are those who inspire trust by being real, by admitting mistakes, by listening deeply. They create spaces where others feel safe to bring their whole selves, including their insecurities. Their confidence is contagious because it is grounded, not grandiose. Similarly, in creativity, embracing the self-confidence paradox frees us to take risks. Every act of creation involves doubt. Every new idea invites uncertainty. If we wait to create until we feel perfectly confident, we will create nothing. True creative confidence is the willingness to dance with doubt, to make things imperfectly, to learn and grow through the process. Ultimately, the paradox invites a profound shift in how we view ourselves and our journey. It invites us to stop chasing an impossible ideal of flawless confidence and to embrace the messy, beautiful reality of being human. It invites us to honor our fears without being ruled by them, to move forward not because we are certain, but because we are willing. Thus, true self-confidence is not loud or boastful. It is quiet and steady. It is the gentle but unshakable belief that we are enough, even as we grow. It is the courage to show up, speak up, try again, and love ourselves through it all. It is the deep knowing that insecurity is not a sign of failure, but a sign that we are stretching, evolving, and fully alive. The self-confidence paradox reminds us that life is not about erasing doubt, but about learning to dance with it, not about being fearless, but about being brave, not about conquering vulnerability, but about embracing it as part of our strength. In this dance, in this embrace, we find a confidence that is real, lasting, and profoundly freeing. The self-confidence paradox teaches us that the path to true confidence is not a straight line upward, but a spiral inward, a deepening into authenticity, a widening into compassion, a softening into acceptance. And in that acceptance, we find a power greater than perfection, the power to live fully, boldly, and beautifully, exactly as we are. The fame paradox. Fame is often seen as the ultimate validation. To be known, recognized, admired by millions, it seems to promise love, belonging, and immortality. It offers a vision of a life where loneliness is banished, where adoration fills every empty space. Yet beneath the shimmering surface, fame often delivers the opposite of what it promises. Widespread fame, rather than curing loneliness, can create a profound and inescapable sense of isolation. This strange and heartbreaking reality is known as the fame paradox. At first glance, it seems logical that being known by more people would reduce loneliness. After all, loneliness is about feeling unseen, unacknowledged, disconnected. Fame seems to offer the cure: endless attention, infinite admiration, a sea of faces all turning toward you. Yet human connection is not about quantity, it is about quality. And fame often warps, distorts, or destroys the quality of relationships in ways that deepen rather than heal loneliness. The fame paradox begins with the nature of attention itself. Fame brings attention, but attention is not the same as understanding. Being recognized by strangers is not the same as being known by friends. The countless admirers may know your face, your name, your achievements, but they do not know your fears, your flaws, your true self. They know an image, a story, a projection, and so even as the crowd cheers, the heart may feel desperately unseen. This gap between public image and private reality can grow into a chasm. The famous person becomes a character, a symbol, a brand. Their true self, the messy, vulnerable, imperfect self, may feel hidden, suppressed, or even lost. Interactions become performances. Relationships become transactional. Trust becomes a rare and precious commodity. How do you know if someone loves you for who you are or for what you represent? The fame paradox also arises from the imbalance of power that fame creates. In ordinary relationships, there is mutuality, reciprocity, equality. But fame tilts the scales. Strangers feel entitled to your time, your attention, your vulnerability, while offering none of their own. Fans may project their fantasies, their needs, their expectations onto you, seeing you not as a person but as a vessel for their own hopes. In such a dynamic, true intimacy is almost impossible. Paradoxically, the more famous you become, the harder it can be to find people who treat you normally. Fame builds walls, even as it seems to open doors. It creates suspicion. Do they want me for me or for my fame? It fosters guardedness. If I reveal my true self, will they betray me, sell my story, exploit my trust? And so, the famous person retreats further into solitude, surrounded by millions but profoundly alone. This loneliness is made even sharper by the expectations of happiness that fame carries. From the outside, fame looks like the summit of human desire. To admit loneliness while famous can seem ungrateful, spoiled, or absurd. And so, many who suffer the fame paradox do so silently, feeling not only isolated, but ashamed of their isolation. They live with the painful irony that the world envies a life that feels, to them, empty. The fame paradox also reveals the human need for authenticity. We crave relationships where we can be fully ourselves, where we are loved not for our achievements or our image, but for our unfiltered being. Fame, by its nature, incentivizes inauthenticity. It rewards personas over persons. It celebrates curated images over complex realities. Living within such a system erodes the soul, creating a hollowness that no amount of applause can fill. This is why so many famous people struggle with mental health, addiction, and existential despair. It is not that fame itself is toxic, but that fame amplifies the human struggles that were already there. It isolates, it pressures, it distorts. It makes it harder to find the simple, grounding experiences that sustain emotional well-being, trust, honesty, humility, and love without conditions. The fame paradox also reflects a broader truth about human connection. True belonging requires vulnerability. It requires being seen, not just in our moments of triumph, but in our moments of doubt and failure. Fame, however, makes vulnerability risky. Every stumble, every flaw, every mistake is magnified, judged, and often weaponized. The incentive becomes to hide, to perform, to shield oneself from the public gaze. Thus, the very path that promises love can lead to a kind of spiritual starvation. Surrounded by admirers, the famous person may find themselves starving for real connection, for someone who does not care about the spotlight, who seeks not the glittering persona, but the flawed and beautiful human beneath it. The fame paradox teaches us that loneliness is not about being alone. It is about feeling unknown, misunderstood, disconnected. You can feel lonely in a crowd, lonely in a marriage, lonely on a stage in front of thousands. You can feel most alone when you are most surrounded by noise. True connection is quiet, it is humble, it is built not on fame, but on presence. One of the most painful aspects of the fame paradox is that it can be self-perpetuating. The more isolated the famous person feels, the more they may retreat into the world that reinforces their loneliness, the world of performances, handlers, PR teams, and curated appearances. The more they hide their pain, the less likely they are to find someone who can meet them in it, and so the loneliness deepens. Yet within the fame paradox lies a deeper wisdom about what humans truly need. We need to be known, not just noticed. We need to be loved, not just admired. We need to be embraced in our wholeness, not idolized for our highlights. And this need does not change with fame. It becomes more urgent, more essential. The fame paradox also reminds us that seeking external validation as a substitute for internal fulfillment is a dangerous trap. No amount of likes, followers, awards, or headlines can fill the inner void left by a lack of genuine connection. True peace, true belonging, comes not from being celebrated by the world, but from being accepted by a few, and by oneself. This understanding invites a gentler view of those who struggle under the weight of fame. It invites compassion rather than envy. It invites us to see beyond the glamour, to the human heart beneath, the heart that, like all hearts, needs love, understanding, and belonging. The paradox also offers a cautionary tale for our own lives. Even if we are not famous, many of us chase smaller versions of fame, social media attention, professional accolades, public approval. We imagine that being seen and admired will satisfy our deepest needs, but the fame paradox warns us that visibility is not the same as connection, that applause is not the same as love. True fulfillment comes from depth, not breadth. It comes from a few relationships where we are known completely and loved anyway. It comes from living authentically, from building trust slowly, from risking vulnerability even when it feels terrifying. It comes from being real rather than impressive. The fame paradox ultimately reveals a profound truth, that the human soul thrives not on attention, but on intimacy, not on being known by millions, but on being truly known by a few, not on being admired from a distance, but on being embraced up close. Fame is not evil. It is not inherently destructive, but it is a force that must be navigated with wisdom, humility, and deep self-awareness. Without these anchors, fame can sweep a person away from themselves, leaving behind only a hollow echo of who they once were. Thus, the fame paradox is a reminder to all of us, whether famous or not, to cherish authenticity over appearance, connection over performance, being known over being noticed. It reminds us that in the quiet spaces of real relationship, in the humble acts of trust and love, we find what fame can never provide: true belonging. And so, even as the world dazzles with promises of recognition and glory, the wise heart turns inward. It seeks not the roar of the crowd, but the warmth of a trusted voice. It seeks not the fleeting thrill of fame, but the enduring comfort of being truly seen, truly loved, and truly known. The Immortality Paradox. Immortality has long been one of humanity's most enduring dreams. Legends, myths, and religions often tell of eternal life, of conquering death, of living forever beyond the reach of time. We imagine immortality as the ultimate blessing, a limitless continuation of experience, love, and discovery. Yet beneath this dazzling dream lies a strange and unsettling truth. Living forever, rather than being a paradise, might eventually become unbearable. This is the heart of the Immortality Paradox. At first glance, the idea seems shocking. How could more life ever be a curse? How could infinite time, endless opportunity, and perpetual existence turn into something heavy, empty, or even agonizing? Yet when we think more deeply, we begin to see the shadows hidden within the fantasy. Life derives much of its meaning from its limits. The urgency of time, the poignancy of endings, the fleeting nature of beauty, all these give richness to our days. Without an end, life could stretch out into a flat and endless plane where each moment loses its weight, its urgency, its sparkle. The Immortality Paradox suggests that mortality, painful though it is, also grants meaning. Knowing that we have only a limited number of days sharpens our choices, deepens our love, and compels us to live fully. Without that boundary, we might drift, postpone, and numb ourselves, believing that there will always be another chance, another tomorrow, another endless series of tomorrows. The fire that propels us forward, the awareness of our own impermanence, would be extinguished. Imagine for a moment what living forever might actually feel like. At first, it would likely be thrilling. Freed from the fear of death, you would explore, learn, love, and create with abandon. Decades would pass, then centuries. You would watch civilizations rise and fall, technologies evolve, languages shift. You would accumulate memories, skills, and wisdom beyond imagining. But slowly, subtly, a weariness might creep in. Experiences would begin to repeat. Novelty would fade. The people you once loved might disappear, leaving behind only memories and a growing sense of isolation. Boredom, often dismissed as a trivial annoyance, could become a profound existential weight. When everything that can be experienced has been experienced 1,000 times, what remains? What new joy can surprise you when you have seen and done all that life has to offer? Even love might lose its intensity when stretched across endless time. What once felt precious and urgent might begin to feel routine, even hollow. The Immortality Paradox also highlights the emotional toll of endless survival. Change is constant. Friends, lovers, societies, and even the very shape of the world would transform endlessly. To live forever would be to endure an unending series of losses, to say goodbye over and over again to everything familiar. To outlive everyone you care about, grief would not be a season, but a permanent companion, an accumulating burden that grows heavier with each passing century. There is also the question of identity. Over vast stretches of time, how much would you change? Would you remain the same person, with the same values, memories, and dreams? Or would you shed identities like old clothes, becoming someone unrecognizable to your former self? If you change enough, are you even the same person anymore? Immortality could dissolve the continuity of self, leaving behind a fragmented existence, a ghost of endless personas without a stable core. The Immortality Paradox forces us to confront another uncomfortable truth. Desire itself might fade. Human beings are creatures of longing. We are driven by goals, dreams, ambitions. But what happens when there is infinite time to accomplish everything? When every wish is fulfilled, every dream realized? Desire might dry up. Purpose might erode. Life might flatten into a monotonous expanse where nothing is urgent, nothing is vital, nothing matters quite enough. The philosopher Bernard Williams famously explored this idea, arguing that endless life would eventually lead to a state of existential tedium, a state where nothing new could truly satisfy. Without an end, life's passions and projects would lose their flavor. We would become, in his words, bored stiff, longing for an end that we can no longer reach. This is not to say that immortality would be pure suffering. It is easy to imagine periods of great joy, creativity, and love, even across centuries. But the paradox suggests that over infinite time, the accumulation of weariness, grief, and existential numbness might outweigh the pleasures. Immortality could become a gilded cage, a beautiful but stifling eternity. The Immortality Paradox also invites us to rethink the nature of fulfillment. Perhaps part of what makes life fulfilling is its very fragility. The knowledge that a moment will not last makes it sweeter. The understanding that we cannot hold on forever forces us to be fully present. Immortality would remove that fragile beauty, replacing it with something harder, colder, less urgent. In many ways, the paradox reflects the broader human struggle with balance. We crave security, but also novelty. We seek stability, but also change. We long for permanence, but find meaning in impermanence. Immortality would tip this balance too far toward permanence, freezing us in an endless now that eventually loses its vitality. This is why so many ancient myths portray immortality not as a gift, but as a curse. The Greek myth of Tithonus, for example, tells of a mortal granted eternal life, but not eternal youth. He ages endlessly, withering into a shadow of himself. Other stories warn of gods and immortals who grow weary of existence, who envy mortals their brief but brilliant lives. These myths capture an intuitive understanding that eternity might not be the blessing we imagine it to be. The Immortality Paradox also carries lessons for how we live our mortal lives. It reminds us to cherish the fleeting nature of time, to embrace the urgency that death gives to life, to live deeply, love fiercely, create boldly, because we know that our days are numbered. It invites gratitude for the very limits we often curse, seeing them instead as the source of life's intensity and meaning. It also challenges our modern obsession with extending life at any cost, Medical science advances daily, pushing back the boundaries of aging and disease. While these advances are valuable, the paradox reminds us that the goal should not be endless life, but meaningful life. Quality, not quantity. Depth, not duration. In facing the immortality paradox, we also confront our fear of death. Much of the dream of immortality is fueled by terror, the terror of oblivion, of non-existence, of the unknown. But if immortality itself could become unbearable, then perhaps death is not merely an end to fear, but a release from it. Perhaps mortality is not our enemy, but a natural and even merciful part of the cycle of existence. There is a quiet wisdom in recognizing that life's beauty lies in its impermanence. That part of what makes love precious is that it is fleeting. That part of what makes sunsets, seasons, and friendships so poignant is that they do not last forever. In their passing, they leave a lasting imprint on our souls, a memory more beautiful because it is bounded by time. Ultimately, the immortality paradox teaches us that eternity is not necessary for meaning. In fact, it suggests that eternity might destroy meaning. That life's richest treasures, love, purpose, growth, joy, thrive not despite our limits, but because of them. And so, rather than dreaming of endless days, perhaps we are wiser to dream of full days. Rather than seeking to escape death, perhaps we are called to embrace life with all the fierceness, tenderness, and wonder that its fragility demands. Rather than mourning our mortality, perhaps we can celebrate it as the canvas upon which we paint our brief, brilliant masterpiece. The immortality paradox reveals a profound and humbling truth. It is not the length of life, but the depth of living that matters. It is not the avoidance of endings, but the embrace of them that gives life its sweetness. It is not the promise of forever, but the miracle of now that makes existence so achingly beautiful. Thus, the paradox does not diminish the dream of immortality. It deepens our understanding of why we dream it, and why, perhaps, it is better left as a dream. It invites us to live not for eternity, but for today, to savor the moments we are given, to love without reservation, to risk without guarantee, to dance boldly in the fleeting, dazzling light of our impermanent lives. The Comfort-Addiction Paradox. Comfort is one of the most alluring pursuits of modern life. We build entire industries around making life easier, safer, more convenient. We design technologies, systems, and lifestyles aimed at minimizing discomfort, maximizing ease, and smoothing out every rough edge. Comfort promises security, happiness, and peace. Yet buried within this pursuit lies a paradox. The more we insulate ourselves in comfort, the more fragile we become. This is the heart of the comfort-addiction paradox. At first glance, seeking comfort seems like an obvious good. After all, who would willingly choose hardship? Pain, difficulty, and struggle seem like enemies to be eliminated wherever possible. Comfort offers relief from the harshness of life. It soothes, it cushions, it protects. But when comfort becomes constant, when the pursuit of it becomes an obsession, it slowly erodes resilience. It weakens the very capacities we need to face the inevitable challenges of life. The comfort-addiction paradox reveals that human strength grows not in the absence of difficulty, but through the encounter with it. Muscles strengthen under strain, courage develops under fear, wisdom arises from mistakes and adversity. When we remove all discomfort, we remove the very conditions that foster growth. We create an environment where fragility thrives, where even minor stresses become overwhelming. Imagine living in a world where every need is instantly met, every challenge instantly solved, every discomfort instantly soothed. At first, it might seem like paradise, but over time, the muscles of patience, perseverance, creativity, and courage would atrophy. Minor inconveniences would feel intolerable, small setbacks would seem catastrophic. Life itself would feel brittle and overwhelming because we had not been strengthened by its natural resistance. The comfort-addiction paradox is visible in countless ways: in physical health, A sedentary life of constant ease leads to weakness, disease, and vulnerability. In emotional health, avoiding difficult conversations or uncomfortable emotions leads to anxiety, disconnection, and fragility. In mental health, insulating ourselves from challenging ideas or difficult truths creates intellectual rigidity and fear. Comfort, when overindulged, paradoxically creates the very suffering it seeks to avoid. One reason the paradox arises is because the human organism is adaptive. We adjust to our environments. When life is hard, we adapt by growing stronger. When life is too easy, we adapt by growing weaker. Our thresholds for pain, frustration, and fear adjust downward. What once would have been a minor annoyance becomes a major obstacle. What once would have been an opportunity for growth becomes a trigger for collapse. The comfort addiction paradox also highlights the emotional toll of a comfort-obsessed culture. When we expect life to be smooth and painless, we set ourselves up for chronic dissatisfaction. Reality, by its nature, involves discomfort, loss, uncertainty, effort, failure. When our expectations are shaped by endless comfort, we are constantly shocked, dismayed, and unprepared for the realities of existence. Instead of meeting life's challenges with resilience, we meet them with despair. This paradox is especially relevant in an age of unprecedented convenience. With a few taps on a screen, we can summon food, entertainment, transportation, and companionship. Technology shields us from boredom, loneliness, and even hunger. Yet rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness are soaring. The easier life becomes, the harder it seems to feel truly alive, truly connected, truly strong. The comfort addiction paradox invites a radical rethinking of what it means to thrive. Thriving does not mean living without discomfort. It means developing the capacity to move through discomfort with grace, strength, and wisdom. It means building resilience, not avoiding pain. It means seeing challenges not as threats, but as invitations to grow. One of the clearest examples of this paradox comes from physical training. Athletes deliberately expose themselves to stress, lifting heavy weights, running long distances, pushing their bodies to the limit. This controlled discomfort builds strength, endurance, and resilience. Without it, their bodies would weaken. In the same way, emotional and mental strength come from facing, not fleeing, the discomforts of life. The comfort addiction paradox also points to the importance of voluntary discomfort. Choosing to face challenges, whether through physical exercise, learning new skills, having hard conversations, or taking personal risks, builds a kind of inner toughness that cannot be faked or bought. It must be earned through lived experience. It is this inner toughness that allows people to thrive in a world that will, inevitably, present difficulties. At a deeper level, the paradox touches on the human need for meaning. Comfort alone does not satisfy the soul. Meaning comes from struggle, from overcoming obstacles, from engaging deeply with life. When life is too easy, it can feel empty. When nothing is demanded of us, nothing is gained within us. Comfort without purpose becomes a kind of slow suffocation, a numbing of the spirit. This is why many people, even those living in great material ease, seek out challenges voluntarily. They climb mountains, run marathons, start difficult projects, and engage in demanding disciplines. Intuitively, they understand that growth requires friction, that joy often lies on the other side of struggle, that true vitality requires stepping beyond the soft borders of constant comfort. The comfort addiction paradox also warns against parenting styles and educational systems that aim to eliminate all discomfort from children's lives. Shielding children from every hardship, every failure, every frustration creates adults who are ill-equipped to face reality. True love does not mean protecting loved ones from every pain. It means preparing them to meet pain with courage and wisdom. There is, of course, a balance to be struck. The goal is not to seek suffering for its own sake or to glorify unnecessary hardship. Life presents enough natural challenges without needing to manufacture misery. The key is to recognize that some degree of discomfort is not only inevitable, but essential. It is not the enemy, it is the forge in which strength is shaped. In practical terms, overcoming the comfort addiction paradox means cultivating habits of voluntary challenge. It means choosing to do things that stretch us, that push us beyond our immediate ease. It means embracing effort, patience, and resilience as virtues rather than inconveniences. It means redefining success not as the absence of struggle, but as the ability to move through struggle with dignity. It also means shifting our cultural narratives. Instead of idolizing effortless wealth, instant success, or perpetual leisure, we can celebrate perseverance, grit, and resilience. We can honor those who have walked through fire and emerged stronger, not just those who have floated on clouds. The comfort addiction paradox ultimately teaches that the good life is not the soft life. It is the engaged life, the life of presence, purpose, and participation. A life where comfort is appreciated but not worshipped. A life where ease is enjoyed but not demanded. A life where growth matters more than avoidance, where resilience matters more than indulgence. Comfort is a beautiful part of life, but it is only a part. When it becomes the whole goal, it turns against us. It erodes our strength, dulls our spirit, and leaves us vulnerable to the inevitable storms of existence. True thriving comes not from fleeing discomfort, but from mastering it. The comfort addiction paradox reminds us that to live fully is to dance with discomfort, to stretch beyond ease, to forge resilience through experience. It calls us to be strong not despite life's challenges, but because of them. It invites us to step off the path of endless comfort and onto the rugged, rewarding path of growth. Thus, even in a world of dazzling conveniences, the wise heart seeks balance. It seeks moments of stillness, but also moments of striving. It honors rest, but also honors work. It welcomes comfort, but does not become a slave to it. In doing so, it finds a deeper kind of peace, not the fragile peace of insulation, but the enduring peace of inner strength. The comfort addiction paradox is not a warning against enjoying comfort. It is a reminder to hold it lightly, to remember that true resilience, true vitality, true joy are born not in endless ease, but in the beautiful, challenging dance between comfort and courage, between safety and daring, between rest and the grand, fierce adventure of life itself. The Dehumanization Paradox. Throughout history, the fight against evil has shaped the course of human events. We rally against injustice, we rise against tyranny, we vow never to become the very forces we oppose. To resist cruelty, oppression, and hatred feels righteous, necessary, even sacred. Yet buried within this noble endeavor lies a troubling truth. In fighting evil, we risk becoming the very thing we despise. This is the heart of the Dehumanization Paradox. The effort to defeat dehumanization can itself dehumanize. At first glance, the idea seems almost insulting. How could fighting for justice, equality, or goodness ever lead to cruelty? How could those on the right side of history ever mirror the wrong? Yet the deeper truth of human nature is more complex and unsettling. Anger, even righteous anger, can blind us. Hatred, even of injustice, can harden us. In seeking to destroy evil, we can inadvertently destroy our own compassion, humility, and humanity. The Dehumanization Paradox begins with the nature of moral certainty. When we are convinced we are fighting for the good, we feel justified in almost anything. We rationalize cruelty, excuse brutality, and silence dissent. We demonize opponents, reducing them from complex humans into caricatures of evil. We stop seeing them as people and start seeing them only as enemies to be crushed. In doing so, we mirror the very dehumanization we set out to defeat. History offers countless examples of this paradox. Revolutions born of high ideals often descend into terror. Movements seeking justice can turn vengeful. Individuals who once championed tolerance can become intolerant of any view but their own. The more passionately we believe in our cause, the easier it becomes to justify actions we would otherwise condemn. In fighting monsters, as Nietzsche warned, we risk becoming monsters ourselves. This does not mean that fighting evil is wrong. It means that how we fight matters as much as what we fight. If we abandon our own principles in the name of victory, we suffer a deeper defeat. If we dehumanize in the name of humanity, we hollow out the very values we claim to defend. The Dehumanization Paradox reminds us that methods and motives are intertwined, and that noble ends cannot justify ignoble means. One reason the paradox arises is the powerful pull of tribalism. Humans are wired to form in-groups and out-groups. When conflict intensifies, the lines harden. Us versus them. Good versus evil. Humanity is reserved for us, and they become the enemy. In such a mindset, empathy withers. Compassion narrows. The other becomes an object, a threat, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be understood. This psychological shift is subtle but devastating. It allows atrocities to be committed not out of sadism, but out of a warped sense of duty. It turns ordinary people into agents of cruelty while convincing them they are heroes. It transforms battles for justice into engines of vengeance and fear. The Dehumanization Paradox is not a flaw of a few, but a potential within all of us, triggered by fear, anger, and certainty. Another reason the paradox emerges is the intoxicating nature of power. Even in righteous causes, power tempts us to control, to punish, to dominate. Once tasted, power can become its own justification. The fight becomes less about principles and more about victory, less about values and more about vanquishing. Power wielded without humility and restraint corrodes character, no matter the cause. The Dehumanization Paradox challenges the simplistic narratives of good and evil. It forces us to recognize that no group, no ideology, no individual is immune to the corrupting effects of hatred and fear. It asks us to hold ourselves accountable, to question not just our enemies' actions but our own. It calls for a vigilance not just against external evils, but against the potential for cruelty within our own heart. This is not a call for passivity or moral relativism. Evil must be resisted, justice must be pursued, but it must be done with eyes wide open, with humility, with a fierce commitment to retain our humanity even in the heat of battle. It means fighting not only for the right causes, but in the right ways, with empathy, with courage, with an awareness of our own fallibility. The Dehumanization Paradox also reveals the importance of mercy. Mercy does not mean excusing wrongs or abandoning accountability. It means remembering that even those who do wrong are still human, still capable of change, still worthy of some measure of dignity. Mercy keeps the heart soft in a hard world. It preserves the soul from being consumed by bitterness. In practical terms, avoiding the trap of the Dehumanization Paradox means cultivating empathy even toward those we oppose. It means seeing complexity where others see caricature. It means recognizing that people are shaped by circumstances, histories, fears, and wounds. It means distinguishing between condemning actions and erasing humanity. It also means resisting the seductive simplicity of moral certainty. Certainty feels good. It feels clean. But human affairs are messy. Motives are mixed. Perspectives are varied. Doubt is not weakness. It is a sign of moral seriousness. Humility is not passivity. It is a safeguard against the corruption of righteousness. The Dehumanization Paradox teaches that the most dangerous moment in any struggle is when we are most convinced of our own virtue. It is then that the temptation to cruelty, to absolutism, to vengeance is strongest. It is then that the line between justice and revenge blurs. It is then that the seeds of future injustice are often sown. Understanding this paradox invites a different kind of strength, a strength rooted in compassion, resilience, and self-awareness. It calls for a fierce commitment to principles, even when it is hard. It demands the courage to stand against evil without becoming callous. It asks for the wisdom to remember that the goal is not just to defeat enemies, but to build a more humane world. The Dehumanization Paradox is a profound reminder of the fragility of goodness. Goodness is not a permanent possession, but a practice, a choice renewed daily. It requires vigilance, humility, and grace. It requires fighting not only against external injustice, but against the internal temptations to hatred, cruelty, and self-righteousness. It also reminds us that healing, not just victory, must be part of our vision. Justice without mercy is brittle. Change without compassion is shallow. True transformation involves not only confronting evil, but also fostering reconciliation, understanding, and the restoration of humanity on all sides. The Dehumanization Paradox thus invites a deeper, more courageous kind of activism, one that resists dehumanization in all its forms, even in ourselves, one that holds fast to the dignity of all people, even those who oppose us, one that fights not just for triumph, but for the preservation and expansion of compassion, dignity, and hope. Ultimately, the paradox teaches that how we fight shapes who we become. Every act of cruelty in the name of good tarnishes that good. Every surrender to hatred strengthens the very forces we seek to defeat. Every moment of compassion, even toward an enemy, strengthens the foundation of a better world. Thus, in every struggle, we face two battles, one against the injustice outside and one against the dehumanization within. Winning the first while losing the second is no true victory. True victory is resisting evil without losing love, confronting wrong without losing empathy, seeking justice without losing our souls. The Dehumanization Paradox is a difficult, humbling truth, but it is also a source of hope. For if we can remain human in the face of inhumanity, if we can keep our hearts open even when the world grows hard, then we do more than defeat evil, we transform it. We build, in the very act of resistance, the kind of world worth fighting for. The Hyper-Individualism Paradox. Individuality is one of the most celebrated values of the modern world. We are taught to prize independence, to express our uniqueness, to follow our own paths. We are encouraged to define ourselves apart from the crowd, to resist conformity, and to seek personal fulfillment above all else. At its best, individualism empowers creativity, freedom, and self-expression. Yet when taken to extremes, it produces a strange and painful contradiction. Hyper-individualism, the intense pursuit of personal autonomy, often leads to profound loneliness and, ironically, to new forms of conformity. This is the heart of the Hyper-Individualism Paradox. At first glance, it seems clear that emphasizing the individual should lead to greater freedom and happiness. After all, when people are free to be themselves, they can pursue their passions, develop their talents, and live lives of authenticity. But human beings are social creatures. We are wired for connection, for belonging, for shared meaning. When individuality is pursued to the exclusion of community, the result is not liberation, but isolation. The Hyper-Individualism Paradox reveals that we cannot flourish alone. When relationships are seen as optional accessories rather than essential parts of life, we lose the deep, sustaining bonds that give existence richness and meaning. When every choice is framed solely in terms of personal preference, when commitment and sacrifice for others are devalued, we find ourselves drifting, rootless and unseen. In a hyper-individualistic culture, loneliness becomes epidemic. Friendships become shallow, transactional, or fleeting. Families fracture under the weight of competing self-interests. Communities weaken as the bonds of mutual obligation erode. People may have unprecedented freedom to be themselves, yet feel more disconnected, anxious, and lost than ever before. The paradox deepens when we realize that extreme individualism often leads, not to colorful diversity, but to new forms of conformity. When traditional sources of identity, family, religion, community fade, people seek belonging elsewhere. They often cluster into subcultures, consumer tribes, or ideological movements, adopting the styles, beliefs, and habits of their chosen group with fervor. In trying to define themselves apart from others, they end up mirroring those around them. This conformity is often masked as choice, but when everyone is striving to stand out in the same ways, individuality becomes a performance rather than an authentic expression. The marketplace quickly learns to commodify individuality, offering endless options that give the illusion of uniqueness while funneling people into predictable patterns. The more we chase personal identity through consumption, the more homogenized we become. The hyper-individualism paradox also affects our inner lives. When identity is seen as a purely individual project, the pressure to find oneself becomes immense. We are told that meaning, purpose, and happiness must be constructed from scratch, without reliance on inherited traditions or communal narratives. For many, this burden is overwhelming. Without a shared framework of meaning, life can feel fragmented, directionless, and exhausting. Psychologically, extreme individualism fosters a fragile sense of self. When identity is based solely on personal choice and achievement, it becomes precarious. Success must be constantly earned. Validation must be constantly sought. Failure becomes not just a setback, but a threat to one's very existence. In a hyper-individualistic society, the self is often brittle, anxious, and perpetually under siege. This fragility is compounded by the cultural narrative that individuals are solely responsible for their own fate. If you succeed, it is your triumph. If you fail, it is your fault. Structural inequalities, chance, and community support are downplayed. This narrative creates a harsh, isolating environment where struggles are privatized and shame is internalized. The hyper-individualism paradox also distorts our understanding of freedom. True freedom is not the absence of all constraints. It is the ability to live within relationships, commitments, and communities in ways that honor both the self and others. Hyper-individualism misunderstands freedom as radical detachment, cutting people off from the very sources of meaning and support that make freedom sustainable. Real individuality flourishes within the context of community. It grows when people are rooted in traditions, connected to others, and supported by shared values. It thrives when people are free to express their uniqueness, while also participating in something larger than themselves. Without these roots, individuality becomes hollow, lonely, and ultimately self-defeating. The hyper-individualism paradox teaches that belonging is not the enemy of individuality, but its foundation. When we are securely connected to others, we are freed to explore, to innovate, to express. When we know we are loved and accepted, we have the courage to be different. When we are part of a living community, we can draw on its strength to find and fulfill our own path. This insight challenges the myth of the self-made person, the lone hero who needs no one. Human beings are and have always been interdependent. Our achievements, our identities, our very survival depend on countless others, past, present, and future. Hyper-individualism blinds us to this truth, impoverishing our sense of gratitude, humility, and connection. The paradox also has profound implications for how we think about love, friendship, and community. In a hyper-individualistic mindset, relationships are often seen as optional, transactional, or conditional. But true relationships require sacrifice, patience, compromise, and commitment. They require subordinating some personal desires to the good of the bond. Without this willingness, relationships become shallow, unstable, and ultimately unsatisfying. To escape the trap of the hyper-individualism paradox, we must reclaim a richer vision of human flourishing. A vision that honors both individuality and community. A vision that sees personal freedom not as an end in itself, but as a means to deeper connection, meaning, and growth. A vision that embraces the paradoxes of life rather than fleeing from them. This requires cultivating humility, the recognition that we are not self-sufficient. It requires practicing gratitude for the countless ways others sustain us. It requires embracing vulnerability, the willingness to need others, to be needed, to give and receive support. It requires building and sustaining communities that nurture both personal freedom and collective belonging. The Hyper-Individualism Paradox invites us to rethink success. True success is not merely achieving personal goals. It is contributing to the flourishing of others. It is living in a way that strengthens the bonds of trust, love, and mutual respect that hold societies together. It is finding our place not above others, but among them. It also invites us to rethink identity. Identity is not a solitary construction project. It is a co-creation, shaped in dialogue with family, friends, mentors, traditions, and communities. It is a tapestry woven from many threads, some chosen, some given, all essential. It is an unfolding story written with others, not an isolated monument built alone. Ultimately, the Hyper-Individualism Paradox teaches that real freedom is relational, real identity is communal, real flourishing is shared. We are most ourselves not when we stand apart from others, but when we stand among them, rooted, connected, alive. Individuality is a precious gift. It allows for creativity, innovation, and personal growth. But it must be balanced with belonging, humility, and shared meaning. Without these anchors, individuality collapses into loneliness and conformity, the very conditions it seeks to escape. Thus, the wise heart seeks a middle path, a path where individuality is cherished but not idolized, a path where community is embraced but not suffocating, a path where freedom is exercised with responsibility and identity is discovered not in isolation but in communion. The Hyper-Individualism Paradox reminds us that we are, at our deepest level, beings of connection. We are meant to live not as isolated stars burning alone, but as constellations, each shining uniquely, yet part of a greater, luminous whole. The Moral Complexity Paradox. When we are young, morality often seems clear. Stories teach us that good is bright and evil is dark, that heroes wear white and villains wear black. In childhood, the world of right and wrong appears simple, comforting, and absolute. But as we grow, as we learn more about history, psychology, culture, and human nature, we discover a more unsettling truth. The deeper our understanding, the harder it becomes to define good and evil with certainty. This is the heart of the Moral Complexity Paradox. At first glance, this seems troubling. Shouldn't knowledge bring clarity? Shouldn't wisdom refine our sense of right and wrong, sharpening our moral judgments? Yet the opposite often happens. The more we learn, the more we see the tangled roots of human behavior. We realize that actions are driven by mixed motives, that virtues and vices coexist within individuals, that cultural contexts shape moral frameworks, and that every hero is flawed, every villain human. The Moral Complexity Paradox reveals that morality is not a simple battlefield of light versus darkness. It is a dense, intricate forest where intentions and consequences weave together in unpredictable ways. It shows that good and evil are not static categories, but fluid, dynamic forces that shift depending on perspective, context, and knowledge. History is rich with examples of this paradox. Leaders once celebrated as heroes are later criticized for their blind spots or atrocities. Causes once deemed righteous are later questioned for the harms they caused. Even ordinary people, when studied closely, reveal contradictions. Moments of selfishness and generosity, cruelty and kindness, fear, and courage. The more we learn about anyone's story, the harder it becomes to render a final, absolute judgment. This complexity does not mean that morality is meaningless or relative. It does not erase the reality of harm, injustice, or wrongdoing, but it demands a deeper kind of moral engagement, one that resists easy labels, that holds conflicting truths, that acknowledges ambiguity without collapsing into cynicism. The moral complexity paradox also highlights the dangers of simplistic moral narratives. When we divide the world into neat categories of good and evil, we risk dehumanizing those we label as bad and idolizing those we label as good. We blind ourselves to the full humanity of others. We excuse cruelty committed in the name of righteousness. We make forgiveness and understanding harder, replacing them with self-righteousness and judgment. By contrast, embracing moral complexity fosters humility. It reminds us that we too are mixtures of light and shadow, that we are capable of both harm and healing, that moral certainty, when untempered by compassion and curiosity, can itself become a source of harm. The paradox becomes especially vivid when we consider conflicts between groups, nations, or ideologies. Each side often believes deeply in its own righteousness and in the wickedness of the other. Yet when we examine the histories, fears, and hopes of each side, we see that both carry wounds, both seek security, both commit and suffer harm. Simplistic narratives fuel conflict. Complex understanding, though harder, is the path to reconciliation. The moral complexity paradox also arises in personal relationships. It is easy to categorize people as heroes or villains based on limited experiences. But when we listen more deeply, when we learn the stories behind actions, we often find layers of pain, fear, love, and confusion. Forgiveness becomes possible not when we deny wrongdoing, but when we recognize the full humanity of the wrongdoer. Psychology teaches us that much of human behavior is shaped by forces beyond conscious control: trauma, upbringing, social pressures, biological impulses. This knowledge complicates moral judgment. It forces us to ask not just, was this action wrong, but what led to this action, and how might I have acted under similar circumstances? Yet, even as the moral complexity paradox deepens our empathy, it also challenges our courage. It is tempting, when faced with complexity, to retreat into passivity, to say that nothing matters, that all is gray, but that is not true. Some actions cause real, undeniable harm. Some values, kindness, honesty, justice, remain worthy of striving for, even in a tangled world. Complexity demands not moral paralysis, but moral maturity. Moral maturity means holding multiple truths at once. It means condemning harm while recognizing the humanity of those who cause it. It means striving for justice while practicing compassion. It means resisting the comfort of easy answers and staying present in the discomfort of ambiguity. The moral complexity paradox also reveals that moral growth is a lifelong journey. We do not reach a point where we know all the answers. Each new experience, each new perspective, each new encounter with difference invites us to revise, deepen, and sometimes even overturn our previous moral understandings. This is not weakness, it is strength. The strength to remain open, to keep learning, to honor truth over comfort. In practical terms, embracing the moral complexity paradox means listening more and judging less. It means seeking understanding before condemnation. It means asking, what is the story behind this, instead of rushing to label? It means recognizing that even when we must take a stand against injustice, cruelty, or harm, we must do so with humility, aware of our own capacity for error. It also means nurturing resilience. Navigating complexity is emotionally taxing. It requires the courage to feel discomfort, the patience to sit with uncertainty, the wisdom to balance competing values. It requires resisting the seductive pull of black and white thinking, which offers the illusion of moral clarity at the cost of truth. The Moral Complexity Paradox teaches that moral greatness is not found in purity, but in the ongoing effort to choose love, justice, and truth amid ambiguity. It is found in the willingness to keep showing up, to keep engaging, to keep caring, even when the path is unclear. It also invites a redefinition of heroism. True heroes are not those who embody perfect goodness, but those who strive toward goodness despite their flaws. They are those who acknowledge their mistakes, who learn, who grow. They are those who resist the temptation to see themselves as purely righteous and others as purely wicked. The Moral Complexity Paradox enriches rather than diminishes our moral lives. It moves us beyond simplistic notions of virtue and vice into a deeper, more compassionate, more courageous engagement with the world. It challenges us to be both firm in our commitments and gentle in our judgments. Thus, the wise heart embraces complexity without losing conviction. It stands for what is right while recognizing its own fallibility. It seeks justice without hatred, truth without arrogance, love without naivety. It sees the world not as a battlefield of good and evil, but as a vast, messy, beautiful tapestry of human striving, suffering, and hope. The Moral Complexity Paradox reminds us that morality is not about achieving certainty, but about cultivating wisdom, not about labeling others, but about understanding them, not about standing above, but about standing with. It teaches us that true moral strength lies not in being right, but in being real, in facing the complexity of life with open eyes and an open heart. The deeper we go into the study of morality, the more we are called to humility, compassion, and courage. The clearer we see the shadows within ourselves and others, the more tender and resolute we must become. The more we learn, the harder it becomes to define good and evil absolutely, and the more essential it becomes to keep striving in every moment, to choose kindness, justice, and love. The Sadness Acceptance Paradox. Sadness is a universal human experience. It visits everyone at different points in life, sometimes gently, sometimes with overwhelming force. Our instinct is often to push sadness away, to distract ourselves, to suppress it, or to rush to replace it with more pleasant emotions. We fear that if we let sadness in, it will consume us, drag us down into an endless well. Yet the strange truth is that resisting sadness often gives it more power. In contrast, allowing sadness, truly welcoming it, often shortens its stay. This is the heart of the Sadness Acceptance Paradox. At first glance, the idea seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't focusing on sadness make it stronger? Wouldn't opening ourselves to it prolong our suffering? Yet human emotions are not logical equations. They are waves of energy moving through us, seeking acknowledgement, seeking to be felt and understood. When we resist them, when we tense up against them, we trap them inside. When we allow them, they often pass through us more swiftly, more gently, more naturally. The Sadness Acceptance Paradox reveals a fundamental truth about emotional life. What we resist persists. The more we try to fight sadness, the more entrenched it becomes. The more we deny it, suppress it, or distract ourselves from it, the more it festers beneath the surface, influencing our thoughts, behaviors, and relationships in ways we may not even realize. Denied sadness often transforms into irritability, numbness, or depression. By contrast, when we allow sadness, when we say, "It's okay that you're here," we create space for it to express itself, move, and eventually soften. We treat the emotion not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a guest to be honored. We listen to what it has to say. We feel its texture, its weight, its movement within us. And in doing so, we allow it to complete its natural arc. Sadness, like all emotions, has a life cycle. It arises, peaks, and, if permitted, subsides. But when we fight it, we freeze it at its peak. We prevent it from resolving naturally. Acceptance is not indulgence. It is not wallowing. It is simply allowing sadness to be what it is, without trying to fix, judge, or escape it. The Sadness Acceptance Paradox also highlights the human tendency to fear pain. We live in a culture that idolizes happiness and pathologizes sadness. We are taught to see sadness as weakness, as failure, as something to be avoided at all costs. But sadness is not a flaw in the human design. It is an essential part of it. It signals loss, longing, vulnerability, humanity. It connects us to ourselves and to each other. Allowing sadness is an act of profound courage. It means trusting that we can survive feeling deeply. It means trusting that sadness, like a passing storm, will not last forever. It means honoring the parts of ourselves that are wounded, grieving, or tender, rather than abandoning them. When we allow sadness, we often discover that it is not as overwhelming as we feared. It may be intense, but it is also dynamic, changing from moment to moment. It may bring tears, but also relief. It may soften into melancholy, into reflection, into quiet acceptance. Sadness that is welcomed often transforms into something more spacious, more peaceful, more wise. The Sadness Acceptance Paradox also reveals that sadness carries important messages. It shows us what we care about, what we value, what we have loved and lost. It teaches us about impermanence, about the preciousness of life. Ignoring sadness means missing these lessons. Embracing sadness means receiving its gifts. In practical terms, allowing sadness might look like sitting quietly and feeling the heaviness in the chest, the lump in the throat, the ache in the heart. It might mean crying without shame. It might mean journaling, painting, walking slowly under a gray sky. It might mean simply whispering to oneself, "It's okay to be sad right now." It also means letting go of timelines. We cannot force sadness to leave by willing it away. We can only create the conditions for it to move at its own pace. Sometimes sadness lingers longer than we want. Sometimes it revisits us unexpectedly. Acceptance means being patient, compassionate, and gentle with ourselves throughout the process. The Sadness Acceptance Paradox also offers a deeper understanding of healing. Healing is not about feeling good all the time. It is about becoming more whole. It is about integrating all parts of ourselves, including the wounded, grieving, and sorrowful parts. It is about learning to carry sadness with grace rather than being crushed by it. When we accept sadness, we also become more compassionate toward others. We recognize that everyone carries invisible sorrows. We become less judgmental, more patient, more kind. We understand that sadness is not a personal failure, but a shared human experience. This acceptance can deepen our relationships. When we are not afraid of our own sadness, we are less afraid of the sadness of others. We can sit with a grieving friend without trying to cheer them up prematurely. We can listen without rushing to fix. We can offer presence rather than solutions. In this way, allowing sadness not only heals us, but also strengthens the bonds of love and community. The Sadness Acceptance Paradox also points to the importance of emotional literacy. Many people have never been taught how to feel sadness safely. They have been taught to hide it, deny it, or drown it in distraction. Learning to allow sadness is a skill, a practice that requires patience, gentleness, and courage. One helpful practice is mindfulness, the art of observing emotions without judgment. When sadness arises, instead of labeling it as bad or trying to analyze it, we simply notice it. We feel it in the body, we observe its qualities, we breathe with it. We allow it to exist without needing to control it. This simple act of mindful presence can transform our relationship with sadness. Another helpful practice is self-compassion, speaking to ourselves as we would to a dear friend, saying, "Of course you feel sad. This is hard. You're doing your best." Offering warmth instead of criticism, tenderness instead of toughness. Self-compassion creates the inner safety that sadness needs to move and heal. The Sadness Acceptance Paradox reminds us that emotions are not problems to solve, but experiences to be lived. They are not obstacles, but pathways. They are not enemies, but messengers. When we honor this, we find that sadness loses its sharpest sting. It becomes less of a threat and more of a companion on the journey of being human. In a world that pressures us to be happy all the time, allowing sadness is an act of quiet rebellion. It is a way of saying, I choose to live fully, not just selectively. I choose to honor all of my experiences, not just the pleasant ones. I choose to be real rather than pretend. Ultimately, the Sadness Acceptance Paradox teaches that sadness, when accepted, becomes softer, wiser, more bearable. It flows instead of stagnating. It teaches instead of tormenting. It heals instead of harming. And in its own time, it gives way to new seasons of life, seasons of renewal, of hope, of deeper joy. Thus, the wise heart learns not to fear sadness, but to welcome it with open arms, to feel it fully, to honor it deeply, to trust its natural arc. To remember that emotions are waves, not walls, that sadness, when allowed, becomes a river that carries us not into despair, but into greater wholeness, greater compassion, greater peace. Allowing sadness does not diminish life. It deepens it. It enriches it. It reminds us that to be alive is to feel, to care, to lose, and to love. It reminds us that sadness is not the end of the story, but a chapter in the beautiful, complex, unfolding narrative of being fully, vulnerably, courageously human, the anti-ego paradox. The pursuit of ego death is a common aspiration among those walking spiritual paths. In countless traditions, from Buddhism to mysticism, dissolving the ego is presented as a gateway to enlightenment, freedom, and union with something greater than the self. To overcome the ego is to transcend selfishness, to move beyond the small I and into a vast, interconnected reality. Yet, hidden within this noble aim is a strange and unsettling contradiction. The very act of proclaiming ego death can itself become a subtle form of spiritual pride. This is the heart of the anti-ego paradox. At first glance, the goal seems pure. Who would not want to transcend the smallness of the ego, the endless grasping for validation, the compulsive need for self-importance? The ego, after all, fuels suffering, jealousy, and illusion. But when the claim of ego death is announced, when the attainment is advertised, a new and quieter ego is often born, one that is harder to see, but just as hungry for recognition. The anti-ego paradox reveals that the ego is not only grandiose in its obvious forms, it is cunning, adaptable, and capable of cloaking itself in humility. The proclamation, "I have no ego," can itself be a form of spiritual boasting, a way of distinguishing oneself, feeling superior, and seeking admiration for having supposedly transcended the need for admiration. This paradox shows that ego death, when pursued as a badge of honor, paradoxically reinforces the ego it seeks to dissolve. It replaces worldly pride with spiritual pride. It replaces the desire to be seen as powerful, successful, or wealthy with the desire to be seen as pure, enlightened, and selfless. The costume changes, but the performance continues. The anti-ego paradox also highlights the human tendency to grasp at identity. Even the identity of one who has no ego can become an attachment, a story we tell ourselves and others. This identity can be fiercely defended, subtly promoted, and internally cherished. In this way, the effort to destroy ego can become just another way to strengthen it. True ego transcendence, as the paradox teaches, is profoundly quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not seek acknowledgement. It does not even cling to the idea of having achieved something special. It simply moves with less self-centeredness, with more openness, with a deeper flow into life as it is. The anti-ego paradox also invites reflection on the nature of spiritual ambition. The desire to attain higher states, to be seen as awakened or transcendent, can be another form of grasping, another way the ego seeks to inflate itself. Spiritual paths, when misunderstood, can become arenas for subtle competition, comparison, and vanity. Recognizing this paradox requires humility, the willingness to question even our noblest seeming impulses. It requires seeing that the ego is not merely a gross desire for fame or wealth, but can infiltrate even our most sacred aspirations. It requires acknowledging that the journey beyond ego is ongoing, fragile, and never complete while we are alive. The paradox is not a condemnation of the spiritual path, but a reminder of its depth and difficulty. It reminds us that spiritual growth is not about building a better self-image, but about dismantling the need for self-image altogether. It teaches that true humility is not thinking less of oneself, but thinking of oneself less. In practical terms, living with awareness of the anti-ego paradox means cultivating silent practice rather than public proclamation. It means being wary of the subtle pleasure we might take in being seen as humble, pure, or evolved. It means practicing inwardly without seeking outward validation. It means embracing the idea that genuine spiritual growth might never be noticed, praised, or even understood by others. The paradox also highlights the importance of self-forgiveness. When we catch ourselves falling into spiritual pride, the answer is not to fall into shame or self-punishment. That too would feed the ego. Instead, the answer is gentle acknowledgement. Ah, there it is again. A smile, a breath, a return to presence. The ego is not an enemy to be eradicated, but a part of our humanity to be understood and gently transcended. The anti-ego paradox teaches that ego death is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. It is a daily practice of loosening attachment, softening pride, letting go of the need to be seen in any particular way. It is a path of endless returning to presence, to compassion, to the quiet ground beneath the endless stories of self. It also reminds us that the ultimate goal is not to annihilate the ego, but to put it in proper perspective. The ego is a useful tool for navigating the world. It allows us to speak, act, and create. The problem arises when the ego takes center stage, believing itself to be the entirety of who we are. Healthy spiritual growth integrates the ego, honors its role, but does not allow it to dominate the inner landscape. The anti-ego paradox suggests that the less we talk about ego death, the closer we might be to it. The less we claim humility, the humbler we might actually be. True transcendence does not need to be declared. It simply shines quietly through our actions, our presence, our way of being with others. In this sense, the paradox points toward a deeper kind of authenticity. It invites us to live our spiritual insights rather than advertise them, to embody rather than proclaim, to let go of the need to be seen as enlightened, and to simply focus on being more loving, more compassionate, more awake. It also invites us to embrace paradox itself, to hold the tension between striving and surrender, between growth and acceptance, between effort and grace. Spiritual maturity involves living with these tensions rather than resolving them too quickly into tidy narratives. The anti-ego paradox offers a profound and humbling lesson, that even our highest aspirations can become traps if we are not vigilant. It reminds us that the ego can hide in the most unexpected places, and it challenges us to be more honest, more gentle, and more self-aware in our journey. Ultimately, the paradox reveals that the true fruits of spiritual practice are not found in dramatic proclamations or public recognition. They are found in quieter places, in patience, in kindness, in forgiveness, in the ability to meet each moment without needing to turn it into a story about me. Thus, the wise heart walks the path not seeking to conquer the ego like an enemy, but to understand it like a teacher. To see its tricks without hatred, to laugh at its vanities with tenderness, to move beyond its illusions with grace. The anti-ego paradox teaches that the journey beyond ego is not a heroic ascent, but a gradual softening, a letting go of the need to be special, important, or separate, a falling into the deeper truth that we are already part of something vast, mysterious, and whole, something that needs no proclamation, no boasting, no defense. And in that falling, in that surrender, true freedom begins. The memory loss paradox. Memory is the thread that weaves together the fabric of our lives. It gives us continuity, identity, and meaning. Through memory, we carry the lessons of our past into the choices of our present. Yet memory is not static. It fades, shifts, and sometimes disappears, especially when the memories are painful. Forgetting painful events can feel like a mercy, a necessary balm for the soul. It can allow healing, freedom, and peace. Yet hidden within this blessing is a strange and delicate contradiction. Forgetting pain can also erase the lessons that pain was meant to teach. This is the heart of the memory loss paradox. At first glance, the ability to forget pain seems purely good. Who would not want to erase memories of trauma, betrayal, humiliation, or grief? Painful memories can haunt us, weigh us down, and prevent us from moving forward. Forgetting offers relief. It lightens the emotional load. It restores the possibility of joy, trust, and hope. In this way, forgetting becomes an act of self-preservation, a kind of unconscious mercy that spares us from endless suffering. Yet pain, as unbearable as it sometimes feels, often carries wisdom. Pain shows us where we have been hurt, where we have been vulnerable, where boundaries were crossed, where trust was broken. It teaches resilience, empathy, caution, and courage. When painful memories fade completely, we risk losing not just the suffering, but also the knowledge embedded within it. We risk repeating old mistakes, falling into familiar traps, ignoring the deeper patterns that pain once illuminated. The memory loss paradox reveals that healing and learning are sometimes in tension. Healing seeks to soothe, to close wounds, to move beyond the past. Learning seeks to remember, to reflect, to draw lessons from the past. Forgetting too much can heal the heart, but leave the mind vulnerable. Remembering too much can preserve wisdom, but keep the heart wounded. Finding the right balance is an intricate, deeply human challenge. The paradox is particularly vivid in the aftermath of trauma. Survivors often experience memory fragmentation, details vanish, timelines blur, emotions detach from specific events. This forgetting can be a protective response, shielding the psyche from overwhelming pain. Yet it can also complicate healing, making it harder to understand what happened, to recognize patterns of harm, to rebuild trust with a clear sense of boundaries and safety. Similarly, in personal growth, forgetting the sting of past mistakes can make it easier to forgive oneself and move forward. But it can also lead to complacency, to overconfidence, to the repetition of harmful behaviors. The memory loss paradox teaches that pain, though bitter, often leaves essential markers along the path of growth. When those markers vanish, we risk losing our way. This paradox is not a condemnation of forgetting. Forgetting is natural, necessary, and often involuntary. It reflects the brain's need to prioritize, to let go of what no longer serves immediate survival or well-being. But the paradox invites awareness. It invites a conscious relationship with memory, neither clinging too tightly nor letting go too easily. One approach to navigating the memory loss paradox is intentional reflection. Even as specific memories fade, we can honor the core lessons they offered. We can journal, create art, tell stories, or engage in rituals that preserve meaning without preserving every detail of pain. We can distill wisdom without carrying the full weight of suffering. Another approach is mindful grieving. Instead of rushing to forget or walling off painful memories, we can allow ourselves to mourn consciously, to feel the sadness, the anger, the fear, without judgment. to let those emotions wash through us without clinging to them indefinitely. In doing so, we honor the reality of our experiences while allowing space for healing. The memory loss paradox also reveals the importance of community in preserving lessons. When individuals forget, communities can remember. When personal pain fades, collective memory can hold the story, the warning, the hope. Traditions, teachings, and shared narratives serve as vessels for the wisdom of past struggles. They allow individuals to heal while still preserving the hard-earned insights of previous generations. Yet even collective memory is fragile. Societies, like individuals, are tempted to forget painful histories, to gloss over injustice, to rewrite uncomfortable truths, to seek comfort over confrontation. The memory loss paradox reminds us that forgetting societal pain, wars, oppression, atrocities, may offer short-term ease but risks long-term repetition. Healing and justice both require a careful balance of remembering and forgiving, of honoring the pain without being enslaved by it. In personal relationships, the paradox plays out subtly but powerfully. When someone we love hurts us, forgetting the pain can allow reconciliation, trust, and intimacy to be restored. But forgetting too much can blind us to recurring patterns of harm. It can enable cycles of abuse, betrayal, or neglect to continue unchecked. True forgiveness requires memory, not to hold grudges, but to hold wisdom. The paradox also invites reflection on the nature of resilience. Resilience is not about forgetting that we were hurt. It is about integrating the experience, carrying the lessons, the strengths, the new insights, without being defined or confined by the pain. It is about remembering enough to grow wiser, while releasing enough to grow freer. The memory loss paradox teaches that memory is not just a storage system, but a living, dynamic process. It changes with time, with perspective, with new understanding. Healing does not mean erasing the past, but transforming our relationship with it. It means being able to hold memories without being overwhelmed by them, to draw strength rather than bitterness from them. It also reminds us to be gentle with ourselves. Forgetting is not failure, remembering is not punishment. Both are natural responses to the complexity of living. Both have roles to play in the dance of healing and growth. What matters is not rigid control over memory, but conscious engagement with it, respecting its rhythms, its gifts, and its limits. The paradox also highlights the humility needed in self-understanding. We are not perfect historians of our own lives. Our memories are partial, biased, reconstructed. What we remember and what we forget are influenced by countless unseen forces. Recognizing this invites compassion for ourselves and for others. It reminds us that healing and learning are imperfect journeys marked by gaps, distortions, and mystery. Ultimately, the memory loss paradox invites a deeper, more nuanced view of pain, healing, and growth. It teaches that pain is not only an obstacle, but also a teacher. That healing is not about erasure, but about transformation. That forgetting can be both a blessing and a risk. It also invites gratitude. Gratitude for the memories that endure and guide us. Gratitude for the forgetting that spares us unnecessary suffering. Gratitude for the mysterious ways in which life moves us forward, often carrying us through forgetting and remembering in just the right proportions. Living with the memory loss paradox means embracing both remembrance and release. It means honoring our past without being trapped by it. It means learning from pain without being defined by it. It means trusting that healing and wisdom can coexist, even when memory is imperfect. Thus, the wise heart holds memory lightly but reverently. It listens to the lessons pain has taught. It forgives the forgetfulness that time brings. It moves forward with humility, knowing that forgetting and remembering are both part of the intricate, beautiful, sorrowful, and miraculous experience of being human. The technology Technology stands as one of humanity's greatest triumphs. It extends our reach, magnifies our strength, accelerates our learning, and connects us across vast distances. With each new tool, from the printing press to the smartphone, our abilities expand. We become capable of doing more, faster, and better than ever before. Yet within this tremendous empowerment lies a strange and unsettling contradiction. The very tools that empower us can also enslave us through dependence. This is the heart of the technology empowerment paradox. At first glance, the story of technology seems purely positive. Innovations save lives, reduce suffering, spread knowledge, and create opportunities that previous generations could only dream of. It is hard to argue against clean water, life-saving medicines, instant communication, or global information access. These are real, profound gifts. Yet the deeper truth is that every tool changes its user. Every advance creates new dependencies, new vulnerabilities, and new forms of control. The technology empowerment paradox reveals that what begins as liberation can, over time, become a new kind of captivity. Tools that once felt like extensions of human will start to shape, direct, and even limit human behavior. Skills that once defined human competence begin to atrophy. Autonomy, resilience, and basic capabilities erode as machines take over more functions. Consider how the simple act of remembering phone numbers has faded. Once a normal mental task, it is now almost obsolete, outsourced to our devices. GPS navigation has eroded our ability to read maps or navigate intuitively. Spell check and predictive text reduce the need for careful writing or spelling. These small conveniences accumulate into a broader loss of competence, a gradual de-skilling that leaves us increasingly helpless without our tools. The paradox deepens when we realize that dependence often feels like empowerment. The convenience, speed, and ease that technology provides create an illusion of increased power, but behind the illusion is a growing fragility. When the tools fail, when the battery dies, the network crashes, the software glitches, we are often left stranded, confused, or paralyzed. The technology empowerment paradox also extends beyond personal competence to social structures. As societies become more technologically advanced, they also become more complex and interconnected. Critical systems, healthcare, transportation, finance, communication depend on vast, intricate networks of technology. A small failure in one node can cascade into widespread disruption. Resilience gives way to brittleness. Robust, low-tech backups are abandoned in favor of sleek, centralized digital systems that work beautifully until they don't. Moreover, as we become more dependent on technology, we also become more vulnerable to manipulation. Algorithms shape what we see, what we buy, what we believe. Surveillance technologies track our movements, our preferences, our private lives. Data becomes a commodity, harvested and sold by entities we barely understand. Our behaviors, thoughts, and desires are subtly influenced by systems designed not for our well-being, but for profit and control. Thus, empowerment through technology is never pure. It always carries a hidden cost, a ceding of autonomy, a drift toward dependency, a vulnerability to external forces. The tools that make life easier also shape life in ways we do not always see or choose. The technology empowerment paradox is not a call to reject technology. The clock cannot be turned back, nor should it be. Technology offers real, profound benefits that can uplift and transform human lives. But the paradox invites a deeper, more conscious engagement with our tools. It calls for vigilance, wisdom, and intentionality in how we create, adopt, and integrate technologies into our lives. One approach to navigating the paradox is to cultivate mindful use, to ask not only, what does this technology allow me to do, but also, what does it make me dependent on, and what skills does it erode, and what vulnerabilities does it create? This questioning allows for more deliberate choices rather than blind adoption. Another approach is to cultivate redundancy and resilience. maintaining low-tech or manual alternatives to critical skills like basic navigation, first aid, face-to-face communication, and independent thinking can safeguard against over-reliance. Technology should augment human capabilities, not replace them entirely. The paradox also invites a reevaluation of what true empowerment means. Is empowerment simply about ease and convenience? Or is it about competence, resilience, and autonomy? A society that mistakes convenience for strength risks becoming weak at its core, vulnerable to both internal decay and external shocks. The technology empowerment paradox also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality. Access to empowering technologies is not evenly distributed. Those with more resources enjoy greater convenience and capability, while those without are left further behind. Moreover, those who control the infrastructure of technology, the platforms, the data, the algorithms, accumulate unprecedented power over the lives of others. Thus, the paradox is not just personal, but political. It raises questions about justice, governance, and stewardship. It challenges us to think about who benefits, who controls, and who bears the risks of technological systems. It demands that we balance innovation with ethics, progress with prudence, power with accountability. The paradox also highlights the importance of education, not just technical training, but critical thinking, ethical reasoning, and historical awareness. Understanding the deeper impacts of technology requires more than knowing how to code or operate devices. It requires the ability to foresee consequences, to question assumptions, to imagine alternative futures. Ultimately, the technology empowerment paradox teaches that human flourishing depends not just on what we can build, but on how we choose to live with what we build. It is a call to remember that tools are meant to serve humanity, not the other way around. It is a reminder that true strength lies not in external appendages, but in internal capacities, wisdom, resilience, compassion, creativity. In practical terms, living wisely within the paradox might mean simple acts, choosing to memorize a few important phone numbers, practicing map reading, having conversations without devices present, setting boundaries on algorithm-driven feeds, questioning the necessity of every new smart device. It means building habits of autonomy and connection, even within a technologically saturated world. The paradox also invites a deeper cultural shift, a move away from worshiping innovation for its own sake, toward evaluating innovation through the lens of human dignity and well-being. Not can we, but should we. Not how fast, but at what cost. The technology empowerment paradox is not a condemnation of human ingenuity. It is a tribute to its complexity. It honors the profound creativity that invents new tools and the profound responsibility that must guide their use. It recognizes that every power we gain must be matched by a deeper wisdom, lest the tools that lift us up become the chains that hold us down. Thus, the wise heart embraces technology with gratitude but not with blind trust. It uses tools skillfully but retains the core human capacities that no machine can replace. It seeks not just to be empowered, but to remain free, not free from hardship, but free to choose, to adapt, to live consciously in an ever-changing world. The technology empowerment paradox teaches that true progress is not merely about expanding what we can do. It is about deepening who we are, becoming not only more capable, but also more thoughtful, more connected, and more resilient stewards of the incredible powers we have created. The Progress-Disillusionment Paradox. Progress is often hailed as humanity's great hope. We strive for it across every field: science, medicine, human rights, technology, and philosophy. Each step forward seems like a victory, a tangible sign that the future can be better than the past. Yet hidden within the glow of progress is a strange and unsettling truth. Every advance, every achievement, every new horizon reached tends not only to inspire satisfaction, but also to highlight how far we still are from our deepest ideal. This is the heart of the Progress-Disillusionment Paradox. At first glance, progress should bring contentment. After all, it means that we have solved problems, reduced suffering, extended knowledge, and improved lives. And indeed, progress does bring real benefits. It saves lives, opens opportunities, and makes possible dreams that were once unimaginable. But paradoxically, rather than resting in gratitude, we often feel even more acutely the gap between where we are and where we want to be. The Progress-Disillusionment Paradox reveals that progress sharpens our awareness of imperfection. It raises our standards. It exposes injustices, flaws, and limitations that were once invisible or tolerated. In doing so, it fosters both hope and dissatisfaction at the same time. The more we achieve, the more painfully we see what remains undone. Consider the example of human rights. 200 years ago, the abolition of slavery was a monumental step forward. Today, we rightly celebrate that achievement, but we also see clearly that injustice persists in new forms: systemic inequality, human trafficking, structural racism. Our moral vision has expanded, not contracted. Progress did not close the conversation, it opened it wider. Similarly, advances in medicine have eradicated countless diseases and extended life expectancy. Yet, with every new cure, we become more aware of diseases still unconquered, of health disparities still entrenched, of suffering that remains intolerable. Progress does not erase the pain of what is left undone. It intensifies our awareness of it. The Progress-Disillusionment Paradox also plays out in our personal lives. As we grow, heal, and develop greater self-awareness, we often become more acutely aware of our flaws. Early in life, we may believe we are close to becoming the person we want to be. Later, with maturity, we see more clearly the complexity of growth, the stubborn patterns that resist change, the ideals that remain elusive. Progress humbles us even as it uplifts us. This paradox reflects a deeper truth about human aspiration. We are creatures of longing. Our ideals are not static. They evolve and expand as we pursue them. What seemed impossible yesterday becomes possible today, and then a new frontier of impossibility opens. The horizon always recedes. Progress reveals not only how far we have come, but also how infinite the journey really is. The Progress-Disillusionment Paradox also speaks to the nature of awareness. Ignorance can be comfortable. When we are unaware of problems, we are untroubled by them. Progress often brings enlightenment, and with enlightenment comes discomfort. We see what we once could not see. We feel what we once were numb to. Awareness itself becomes a kind of burden, a call to responsibility that cannot be easily ignored. This paradox can lead to frustration and cynicism. After so much effort, why are we still so far from our ideals? After so much progress, why does suffering persist? After so many victories, why do injustice, cruelty, and ignorance endure? The disillusionment can be deep, tempting us to despair or bitterness. Yet the Progress-Disillusionment Paradox also carries a hidden gift. It shows that our standards are rising, not falling. It reveals that our moral imagination is growing. It means we are not content with partial victories. It means we are capable of seeing more, feeling more, caring more. Disillusionment, painful as it is, can be a sign of maturity, of deeper commitment to the good. In practical terms, living with the Progress-Disillusionment Paradox means cultivating resilience. It means recognizing that progress is not a final destination, but a never-ending journey. It means celebrating achievements without succumbing to complacency, and grieving unfinished work without surrendering to despair. It also means holding paradoxical emotions side by side, gratitude and dissatisfaction, hope and sorrow, pride and humility. It means being able to say, "We have come far, and we have so much further to go," without collapsing into cynicism or naivety. The paradox invites us to honor progress without idolizing it, to see it not as proof that perfection is around the corner, but as proof that striving is worthwhile. Each step forward matters, even if the ultimate goal remains out of reach. The Disillusionment Paradox also challenges our narratives of success. In a culture obsessed with milestones and victories, it reminds us that true success is measured not just by what we achieve, but by what we aspire to. It is found not only in victories won, but in ideals pursued, even when the pursuit is endless. This understanding fosters humility. It reminds us that we are part of a long, unfinished story, that we inherit struggles from those who came before us and pass them on to those who will come after, that no single generation will complete the work of justice, wisdom, or healing, but every generation can move the story forward. The paradox also deepens compassion. When we see how much remains undone, we are called not to contempt, but to care, not to self-righteousness, but to solidarity, not to blame, but to the shared, humble work of building a better world, peace by imperfect peace. In personal growth, the Disillusionment Paradox teaches patience. It invites us to be kind with ourselves and others as we stumble, learn, regress, and grow again. It reminds us that no amount of progress will eliminate the messiness of being human, and that this messiness is not a flaw, but a feature of our journey. The paradox also reveals that ideals themselves are alive. They evolve as we approach them. Justice, peace, freedom, love. These are not fixed endpoints, but living visions that deepen as we engage with them. Every step toward them reveals new depths, new demands. Thus, progress is both real and incomplete. It is both a cause for celebration and a call to humility. It is a light that reveals new shadows, a path that opens into new wilderness. It is not a betrayal of hope, but an invitation to a deeper, more resilient hope. Living with the Disillusionment Paradox means cultivating what some have called tragic optimism, the ability to see life's pain and beauty side by side, to grieve what is broken while still believing in the possibility of mending. It means learning to find meaning not in arrival, but in striving, not in perfection, but in persistence. The Disillusionment Paradox teaches that the work of healing, justice, wisdom, and love is never finished. It is a lifelong, even a species-long endeavor. Each act of progress matters, even if it does not fulfill all our hopes. Each small step forward plants seeds for future growth, even if we will not see all the harvests ourselves. Thus, the wise heart celebrates progress without clinging to illusions. It honors victories while acknowledging unfinished battles. It draws strength from how far we have come and courage from how far we still have to go. And in doing so, it finds a deeper peace, not the peace of completion, but the peace of commitment. Not the peace of arrival, but the peace of the endless, beautiful journey toward ever greater love, justice, and truth.